Well, on today's show, I'm extra excited to introduce CJ Walley. He's a screenwriter. He is the head of a production studio, Rebel Rouser, and a lot of people know him through his revolutionary site called Script Revolution, where he's really gone head to head with, I think, an industry that sometimes takes advantage of screenwriters and given them an even playing field without draining their pocketbooks. So welcome to the show, CJ.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great being here, and that's a hell of an intro.
Maybe that should be your new tagline, helping you sell your script without draining your
It's a hell of a
pocketbook.
statement, and it's one I really like to hear.
You know, we're going to go into so much today because you do have a new book, sneak preview, Turn and Burn. We're going to touch on that, but I think your story is so much more than that. You know, you can learn the nuts and bolts of writing a screenplay, but getting it produced, you know, not just at the Hollywood level, but at the medium and indie level. It's kind of shark infested waters, and there's a lot of people who prey upon screenwriters.
That's so true. And the book originally started more sort of craft orientated because I started putting this stuff together before my career started to actually start to go somewhere. And yeah, about like 50% of the book now is career orientated and trying to, exactly what you say, avoid those shark infested waters.
Well, before you started Script Revolution, you had your scripts on other websites. And I know we've talked about this the last time we talked. We don't need to go totally in depth with it. But I just want your perspective since we last talked, because year by year, new websites come up, new contests, new film festivals. And, you know, everyone's looking for that golden ticket of some third party to discover them, you know, saying, wow, this is the best thing since Pulp Fiction. You know, we want to, you know, go into production right away. What do you think now with the internet? Are screenwriters savvier, or are they still just, you know, so hoping that they'll be discovered that they just have this, you know, blind area?
It's funny because I'm going back in now as a working writer and also as a producing partner as well, and someone who's gaining more and more industry awareness from Script Revolution. And I'm going back in, and nothing's progressed positively from my experiences in a lot of communities before. It feels like it's actually got a little bit worse, and it feels like every community out there's now become ring fenced by those sharks that we were talking about, which are trying to get hold of, quick cash and give people false promises. And what I'm seeing increasingly is an influx of people now who kind of have, I call it a Wall Street bets attitude, and that's kind of become infamous now for trying to make money from stocks fast, meme stocks. Well, I feel like screenwriting has become like that, and I'm seeing all these people join, and they all want that $1 million script sale, and they all want it as easy as possible, and they all want to use a service which is exactly like, say, a golden ticket, a loot box, a cheat code, an easy way in. It's become a get rich quick scheme, and yeah, I'm finding it incredibly difficult more than ever now to get the message out about what I'm trying to do and trying to bring some sanity to all this.
Well, one thing that you did right off the bat with Script Revolution is you didn't charge a fee. You told people you can post your script, people can read them, give you feedback. You did add, a very small fee as an option for other, premium features, which is fine for what, $7 a month, and a lot of these sites are charging $20 a month just to get on. So what do you think the people who go to your site get the most value from?
I think, well, it sounds corny, but it's this hope element, and it's having an absolute baseline that you can fall back to. And it was one of the reasons why I stopped when I started Script Revolution. My big issue with the sites that were out there, it wasn't necessarily what they were doing for the people that succeeded. It was the impact they were having on the people that weren't succeeding, the 99.9% who didn't get picked, who didn't make the rank, and something like that. And back then in 2016, when I started the site, you had nowhere else to go, really. I mean, Simply Scripts was an option. Not many people knew about that. And Don Booth was doing a great job, but he was manually uploading all the scripts. This meant you could put a portfolio out there, you could get your scripts, you didn't need to build a website, you didn't need to pay anything. You could get back to writing, and that's what most writers want to do. They just want to write and know that their material stands a chance.
So you've had some success stories there. What's the reality of posting a script on a site, having a production company look at it, option it, buy it, and see it produced?
Well, I mean, so I'm very honest about Script Revolution and where Script Revolution falls into the zeitgeist and the spectrum, and it tends to attract low budget producers, particularly outside of the US domestic market. And yeah, I mean, they reach out to some of these people, and the offers aren't life changing. The profile isn't life changing. There's no glitz, glam, and glory with any of this. But what tends to be there are the career starting opportunities. It's that first credit. It's that first experience working with producers that can actually get something made. And that reality for people. I mean, we've got a guy on there at the moment, Guy Piazza. He has been trying to break in for 3 decades. He's spent a small fortune everywhere else. He is based in the US. He put his script on Script Revolution. Things have happened. He's now shooting Dig Me No Grave in Birmingham, England, only an hour south of where I am now. And he's having time of his life with that. So yeah, I think it's career starting or career changing, certainly.
Maybe the film industry could do what the TV industry has done really well. You write a spec script for an existing TV series, set it in knowing they probably won't produce your script, but those producers will find out if you have talent and say, you know what, we're going to assign you a project. We know you can write. We know you can get inside the head of the characters we created. And I think a lot of people are so independent, screenwriters, they're so married to just their own ideas. Don't you think there's a benefit of screenwriters just being open to assignments and saying, you know what, actually it's a really good discipline to be given a concept, a genre, saying, okay, we need this script in 4 weeks. These are the parameters. Go ahead and write it.
Absolutely. I can't encourage that attitude more. This is the reality, particularly in the more established areas, particularly the closer you get to Hollywood, the far more likely it's going to be that you get an assignment thrown at you. And this is another reason why I don't like so many people being obsessed with trying to create a Goldilocks script. They want to create this perfect spec script, which is going to get bought up. And a lot of people are doing that via feedback. So they're just constantly asking for feedback on this script and trying to please everybody, trying to please the crowd. It's a fallacy, because what happens is you don't learn the craft behind creating that good script. So you can't go out and replicate it in a different environment. And people absolutely need to. A good way to practice this is with short scripts, for example, where you set logistical constraints and things like that, so that you're writing to a degree to a brief, to at least to a logistical brief. And yeah, I mean, that's where the vast core of screenwriters' work actually lies. And the demand for spec scripts is just at an all-time low, because as a producer, why would you go looking for a spec script that you can try and make when you could go out, pay someone to write you something that you know fits your requirements?
Alfred Hitchcock is so associated, as the auteur of his films. But the thing is, he didn't write them, but he might read an article and think, wow, that would, make a good idea for a film, or more than likely his wife did, and then told him about it. And then they would hire a screenwriter, and they might have some favorites, or they'd read a good short story by Robert Bloch, and then create Psycho or, whatever. And I think that whole idea of, being the auteur, everyone thinks they have to be all things. but film is collaborative, and even writers, don't you think they'd be a little better off if they incorporated some collaborative thought?
Again, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I very, 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 very rarely tell someone that screenwriting isn't for them, because I think within most people they have the capacity to be a good screenwriter. But sometimes I just pick up on this attitude which comes out of new writers, and they almost already have this preloaded anger and animosity and angst towards the concept that anyone's ever going to come back and tell them to change anything about their script. And they're already ready to get into arguments and battles with directors and how dare they, and they must work together and they must approve everything. And they don't realize that it's incredibly easy to just cut the screenwriter out if they become a problem. It's phenomenally easy, and the big studios do it. They churn through writers over and over again. So in some rare circumstances when I can pick up that a person will never accept any other impact on their script, I tell them maybe you should be doing self-published novels, because you're going to find this incredibly tough. The other thing I tell people, that assignment you hand in, that spec script you hand in, that is 100% yours. You will always have that. You will always be able to show people that. That's what you own creatively. That's your best shot at the movie. Once you've handed that over, it is a gift to the production.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like people who do resist that are in this perpetual loop. And I wouldn't say it's like on all sites, because this could be on Reddit or social media. But you post your work, it's your baby, you're emotionally attached to it, and you spend a lot of energy defending it. And that becomes its own thing, as opposed to, let me back away from social media and make some contacts with producers. And let me actually, in a very professional way, try to make some contacts with people who could get my work produced. And it seems like a lot of writers just exhaust their creative energy and just their business energy on online silliness. You know what I mean?
It's so true, and it's such a waste of life energy, because that's what you have at the end of the day. That's when you earn money, it allows you to generate more life energy. That's what you have to remember, and you have to be very careful about where you use it up. And it's very easy to get sucked into forums and dragged into replying to every single post on there. And I absolutely agree. There's a tremendous amount of defending a script against the people you will never win against and don't need to win over to succeed. You can get drawn into sparring back and forth over a script. That person's never going to buy your script. That person's never going to recommend your script to anybody. And the reality is, you're going to face people that don't get your vision, don't understand what you're trying to do, don't appreciate your voice, haven't put the energy into looking at what you do. So move on and put that energy into people that can actually make something happen for you.
Well, in addition to being a good writer, how important is it to develop the personality that a producer wants to work with?
That's a great question, because I think it's critical, particularly if you accept the reality that you're most likely going to be working on assignment work. Ideally, you want producers to go out there and say, if you get a chance to work with this writer, take it, because it's going to be a wonderful experience. And it can be a wonderful experience. It's portrayed quite negatively, so it's easy for people to go in again with some angst and animosity kind of preloaded. But I don't get a load of notes on my work. I never have had a ton of notes. I've never had someone come back and say, this is bad, this is terrible. I've never really had changes that have upset me. And I very rarely have to produce many. I write one draft and that gets polished. That's the way we make our movies. And I've worked hard to get into a space like that, and I've made sure that's a space that I have gotten into, because I'm aware of the reality out there. So yeah, you have to be amenable. You have to be someone who's a pleasure to work with. You have to be fun. You have to be positive. You can't be too precious. You can be an artist still, because it's gonna be tough. Every day I face something tough. Last night I faced something tough. and it gets you, man. And you've got to have a good, positive, collaborative attitude.
Well, I'm going to quote your book where you quote Quentin Tarantino. Do you know what page that's on off the top of your head?
Crikey. There's a lot of referencing Quentin Tarantino in this book. This is going to be about readers.
I found it. Yeah, this is page 105. Good memory. Do you remember what talk show
it was Howard Stern.
Said this
Howard
on?
Stern.
See? So this book was not ghostwritten. You actually wrote this book yourself.
I did the typing.
Amazing. Turn and burn. Okay, quote. I couldn't get past the readers at studios. The minute people actually in the studios who read boring scripts all the time actually read my shit, trigger warning, they were like, this shit is awesome. Send it right to us. But the readers would never let it get there. And let's talk about readers. And it's kind of a cliche, but, you know, the kid out of college who has the least experience is the gatekeeper to read scripts and, you know, write a little report to pass on to someone. And I think one of the hardest things to do, even for an experienced person, is to read a script and visualize it, to think, okay, this is how it would make a good movie. Seriously, it is really, it's brain draining to force yourself to make this script come alive, because a lot of successful, famous movies, if either of us read that script before that movie was produced, chances are we would have passed on it too.
Correct. It's people are so in love with their own work, and screenwriting is such a novelty to them, they don't appreciate that most producers would rather do pretty much anything but read a script that they don't have to absolutely read.
It's a chore.
Yeah.
It's like being sent to detention. It's like being sent to the corner, you know, or sent to your bedroom without dinner. But when you're on a website like Script Revolution or these other sites, the same thing is, and this isn't a criticism, but I think especially if you're up there and you want everyone to, you know, take 4 hours without distraction to read your script, okay? And you're just, you know, waiting for not this, browsing through, reading every other page, but it's everyone's dream that your full attention without interruption, you get that full, you know, whatever. And I'm sure most readers do not read, you know, script from cover to cover without interruption. They're doing it while they're, you know, tweeting and whatever. So you've got all these people who want that consideration with their script. How often do they reciprocate? How often do other screenwriters really sit down and read other people's script the way they wish theirs were read?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And on Script Revolution now, I'm pushing quite hard for people to try and fill this chasm between a log line and a script read, because it's such a huge thing for a person. It's a huge jump for a person to make. So they need to fill that with a synopsis and various other things. But people don't tend to reciprocate. But there's kind of another issue here. It's kind of the elephant in the room, and I'm going to say it. Quite a lot of times, the kind of people who are attracted to reading scripts aren't necessarily the kind of people you want feedback from. They are looking for things to find problems with. They are not coming in a positive way quite often. Script Revolution works. One of the ways that you can get additional exposure is by getting favorites. So if someone reads your scripts and likes it, they're encouraged to hit that like button, hit that favorite button. And it's all about positive reinforcement. No one cares why someone's passed. No one cares about people who are passing, because it's 99 out of 100 times it is a pure taste problem. That's all it always comes down to. But yeah, everyone wants to be read. No one wants to read.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing with script writing, and maybe Quentin Tarantino contributed to this, it's really easy if there's some clever dialogue. That's something you can grasp onto. But a few clever lines doesn't make a movie. And I think it's really hard to judge the tone that the movie will be based on the script, and people don't realize, just how you're going to direct the actors delivering, because some screenplays are full of subtext, and it's really hard to read subtext unless you have some sophistication.
Absolutely true. And then if you look at an actor's copy of the script during a production, this thing ends up like a phone book. It's got post-it notes stuck in every side. It's got extra sheets of paper. It's got notes scrawled all over it as they're kind of, in some cases, deciphering. We've got a weird system, and I don't like it, and I'm trying to work in a different way, where the screenwriter goes subtext, script gets in the actor's hand, and then the actor tries to work the subtext out backwards. And it's like, I can give you, I do now, when they get a production copy of the script, it has the original development notes in, so they know where the beats are and what they mean. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think it's quite important, artistic voice and a charm and a charisma to the prose in a script, which conveys tone. So I think that if you go in and your description lines, they have that kind of twang to them that perhaps suggest, hey, this is something quite pulpy, or this is something dead serious, that can actually really, really help give the tone that you need. And you see that particularly, using Tarantino example, the opening scenes of Death Proof. And he's completely politically incorrect, and he describes Jungle Julia walking through her apartment, and he describes her, and he says she's got a fat ass, and in brackets it says a good thing. And regardless of your opinion on whether or not it appeals to you, if you feel it's too progressive, or not progressive at all, or perhaps just fun, it's undeniable what kind of movie we're getting into here, and what the writer intends.
Well, this brings us into a collaboration you have with an entity called Get It Made. And it's all about the proof of concept film. So let's talk about that, okay? And I think there's pros and cons to it. There's a lot of pros. We're in an era now of the lookbook. See, I can remember back in the day. We'll back it up and bring it to the present. Back to Roger Corman, or my favorite, remember Full Moon Video?
Roger Corman. I recently read his book, How I Made Over 1,000 Films and Never Lost a Dime.
Classic book. Yeah, I love that one too. And I just remember, like, back in the maybe 90s, the trade papers, and I think it was Full Moon was so good about, they'd show like all the movies coming out for that year. They'd have the posters, and they had it down. It was the title, the tagline, and then that poster art. And if you couldn't grasp it off that, especially say it was sci-fi or horror, alien this, cyborg that, there'd be like this little, deep in the heart of outer space, alien something. Then the tagline, don't let it bite you in the ass, or something fun like that. And I remember the first time I realized those movies got sold based on that without a distributor or a video store even watching it.
Yeah.
And I always liked that, because that's a really good hurdle. If people can't grasp what you're doing at that point, there's no way a proof of concept film or a lookbook is going to do that either. That's the first two people have to jump through before they'll even look at those other things.
I think it's a fair argument to some extent, and let's not forget, a lot of indie films are still sold in that way, and that's how those film markets work. People walk in, they look at posters, they look at cast lists, maybe they watch a trailer, and they're literally buying for their territory off the back of that. In many cases, it's been that way for a long time. But the issue with scripts is the sheer amount of competition out there. The numbers are terrifying, and they get more terrifying every year, and we're talking tens of thousands of new scripts on the market, and we're talking about an industry where demand is just incredibly low relative to supply. So I think the more people can do to bridge this gap, which I talk about, the gap between reading a 25 35-word logline and actually committing to a script read, there's a lot of room for different things in the middle there. There's room for a poster image, for example, which, very powerful way of communicating the tone and content of something, just the same as the way as a book does. A long and short synopsis, for example, and now people are doing things like suggested cast lists, location details, and other factors there. And I think a proof of concept is a good option for those that can afford the time and energy to put it in there. Because something I found as a producer is I can find 10 minutes. I can find 10 minutes to load up a web page, see some details, click a play button, and sit back and just watch some actors play out, the kind of, in the case of Get It Made, X, they produce a proof of concept. The script literally is selling the movie, so it's not like it's the opening scene from a pilot. It's specifically created to show what this thing's going to be. I think that's incredibly powerful. I think there is a competitive edge for those who do it well. Doing it badly, going to be do more harm than good.
Well, some people think of a proof of concept as almost like an extended trailer. How is it different than that? What makes a proof of concept in your mind, specifically a marketing tool?
They are very similar, a trailer and a proof of concept, but obviously putting a trailer together, you've got to shoot multiple scenes, you've got to do some very creative editing, you've got to find some kind of soundtrack for that's going to work. And when we put the trailers together for our own movies, it's tough. I mean, it is tough to make it look sexy, to make it look appealing, because you need to go through so much content and material and pick out the best bits. And if you're going from zero, you haven't got anything there. Now, what you can do with a proof of concept is you can take a single location, and you can take 2 or 3 actors, and you shoot that well, and you write a script that's engaging for those people. You throw in a little bit of SFX in some cases, it can work, on a budget, and you are selling more of a character-driven script in many cases. So you're introducing your main protagonist and your main antagonist and supporting characters, the closest to them, and you're giving them a personality, and you're kind of giving them an idea of the tone and the pace and everything else. So yeah, I think a trailer's a bit like a menu, and a good proof of concept's more like a sampler.
Mm-hmm. So in a trailer, the cuts are quicker. You're just showing seconds here and there. In a proof of concept, would you show more of an extended scene and show more of the story development between the actors?
Yeah, usually you introduce the characters in some way, and you introduce the premise through them in some way. And I've seen effective proof of concepts that are 10 minutes long, and they're set on one location. They're shot well, and they've got characters coming in, one after the other, but it's done in a way that's really engaging, like a good short script should be. So I've seen some where, it's very rare to go for more than one location. You can do it. Again, the creativity comes from looking at your script and saying, how can I write something which introduces everything? It's a great way to appreciate logistics in that regard. But the sky's the limit. And this has worked before, for some big players. Rupert Sanders, he famously put together a proof of concept for Snow White. Rupert, perhaps not the best example of a director to bring up, but he is someone who got the job via a proof of concept. He used his kids in that, with some special effects samples. The 100 used, some kind of more prototyping of the kind of effects they wanted to use. In that case, purely to show it was possible to do at a technical level. So there's all kinds of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Didn't that TV series, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, didn't they originally make a very low-budget pilot, almost like on a home video camera?
I don't know that example in particular, but you do hear about that a lot, particularly it's come off the back of a web series or something like that, where they kind of shot it themselves at home, and You know, I mean, they're good. They're excellent writers and good actors. I, generally speaking, I'd be hesitant to recommend for someone to just go out and try to shoot something themselves, because it can just go so horribly wrong.
Because one thing is, I think the biggest danger is your production value of it. Because if it's just on the page, a producer can imagine it with the highest quality filming. The minute you commit it to film, the producer who sees that proof of concept is never going to imagine it elevated from that. That's their first impression. So they're going to think, in your mind, this is, big screen, 70 millimeter, and if yours looks like, kind of degraded digital video, they're going to think low budget, exploitation film.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the problem. That's, again, Get It Made X, the way they do it is they choose the best concepts out there, and then they produce them up to a very, very, very high standard, easily enough to get a good distribution deal. I've never seen anything coming out of there that doesn't look, good enough to get on the streaming platforms or anything like that. And I 100% agree. You stand a chance of underselling it if you show someone an example which is half baked. Thankfully, in that case, because it's run by people with their own production company, Absurd Hero Productions, Matt Boda, a working director. Yeah, I've been very impressed with the quality there, and that's what people should be aiming for.
The proof of concept films I see, it's hard not to look at them and think of them as a director's reel. So when you're making this, are you packaging that, saying it's not just the script, but this is also the director we'd like to make it with?
Sometimes I have seen people do that. It's not the case with Get It Made. Get It Made is definitely about, it's all about the script. It all hinges off the script. The script is the hub, and sometimes what they will do is, I think it can be good for an actor's showcase. In that case, I wouldn't say there's usually enough meat there for a director to hang their hat on. Not in a proof of concept, because you're usually talking about one or two scenes, and there's not enough there to show for it. But yeah, I mean, you could get a little bit of noise on a cinematographer. You definitely get some attention on the actors, but generally speaking, it's kind of reverse of doing short scripts, in film festivals. Because short scripts in film festivals, it's all about the director. Cinematographer gets some attention, actors get some attention. Who wrote it? Who cares? They're not here. They couldn't afford the taxi over here. So yeah, they've got a name somewhere, but whatever.
Mm-hmm. It seems like crowdfunding has really influenced this, especially with the idea of, on a crowdfunding page, all the big ones, the Kickstarters, there's like the introductory video, which is, the producers or the creators just talking to the camera. But it seems like that a proof of concept is creeping into that now too. Even on crowdfunding, people are getting savvier and thinking, well, wait a minute, it's not just enough you're talking to your camera about how excited you are. What's something tangible you can show us to prove that you're competent and have some talent?
Yeah, I mean, that's become throughout. I'm a seed investor in small businesses over here. It's what I do on the side to try and make my money work better for myself. And I got into that reasonably recently. So I ended up touring through all these pitches, on these investor sites. And even those who are making little widgets and things like that, which are the most boring little things in the world, have these videos, and the quality is incredible. It's like watching, I don't know, it's like James Cameron put this stuff together, like watching the Terminators being made or something like that, and these people are selling a phone holder or something. So if you look at that at a business level, at the quality you're seeing there, that's also being replicated with these film fundraisers as well. And absolutely, people are getting smarter with what they want to invest in, and people are realizing now that if you want to showcase yourself and stand out, the quality of your work needs to be exceptional.
Well, with what you've done with Script Revolution and screenwriting websites, how do you think we could tweak Kickstarter and the crowdfunding pages for filmmakers? Because there are some filmmaker exclusive crowdfunding sites, and I think they have tried to do innovative things, but it seems like we're ready for another breakthrough with crowdfunding.
Potentially, yeah. I feel that it's, I don't want to call it a fad because that's quite disrespectful, and it's gone on for probably 10, 15 years now. But I think the big issue for a lot of people with crowdfunding now is why am I subsidizing this? Like, it's not an investment, and I think that's going to become increasingly problematic for people. Um, Getting a credit in exchange for, I don't know, $500 or whatever you're going to put in, or getting a DVD, or getting a shout out from the director, what is that really worth in the big scheme of things? And what I would like to see more of is more of a genuine business orientated attitude to this. Okay, if I invest in this, what do I get back? What do I get back really? Do I get participation? Am I going to get back anything near the value that I'm putting in? Because a t-shirt isn't going to cut it when people know now that they can go, and again, we speak about stock investments, seed investments, crypto, and areas like that. I think people are getting more savvy of where they put their money. So yeah, you know, I think at some point someone's going to work this out, and they're going to build a funding site that becomes very, very popular, where there is genuine investment in the project. And ideally, that would be linked to distribution channels, so there's complete 100% transparency all the way through. Script Revolution and its role within that, Script Revolution is always going to be a step back. It's always going to be at the script finding stage rather than the film funding stage, because I need to focus on a simple task, I think, and try and do that well.
You know, for all that people want to be part of this, get their scripts produced, there's always this kind of fear of talking about money. Where does the money come from to finance this? Oh, you handle that. I'm just a creative person. But if you, as a scriptwriter, can maybe bring some money to the table without, not that pay-to-play kind of money, but saying, I've got some investors I can bring with me. If you have a structure, in place as a producer, and I can bring some investors, and we can put it in writing, and have contracts made. How proactive do you think a screenwriter should be to think from the point of view that I'm bringing some money to the table, but without being abused and taken advantage of?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think it's within the remit of most screenwriters that I've seen. Most screenwriters I've seen have traditional employed careers, usually lifelong careers that they're trying to jump out of, and they're not business orientated at all, and they don't tend to be wealthy in any way at all. What I am trying to encourage every screenwriter to do is to think more as a producer. I think that's becoming more and more critical now. I think it's healthy in terms of building a career, but it's also healthy in progressing that career and maximizing your opportunities. I personally, I never intended to become a producer, and now I'm a producing partner on 2 films. I'm involved at the highest level, and for me personally, it's incredibly fulfilling experience. Now, if a screenwriter has access to funds, they ain't a screenwriter anymore. Screenwriters now just become a minor part of their role, and they just became basically, I mean, at least a producer. If they know the person with the money, they just became a fund manager. To be blunt about it, because they're saying, yeah, I know this person, I know the money, I know how they can potentially capitalize on it. But yeah, it's a tricky one, because a lot of people, they want to go to friends and family for things like this, and it's a good way to fall out with family, putting money into film. Let's face it, if you've got no experience. So Yeah, I think if someone was in that position and they had the cash, they need to be very smart, very sensible. They need to find small indie directors that can actually deliver. And kind of best thing they can probably do, go make a short film, and get used to
Hmm.
everything that comes with the management of money and making sure that that money doesn't get wasted in any way at all.
So, how did this collaboration with Get It Made come about?
It's quite funny actually. So generally speaking, because Script Revolution is still relatively unknown and very few people actually want to talk about it, which is quite odd. It's still very underground.
Wait a minute. I heard in an interview you have 10,000 users on the site.
12,000 now.
It's hardly enough.
12,000 now. And
12,000. Come on,
and
that's somewhat
it,
known. At the very least,
it's
that's
the
somewhat
way it's
known.
become known, which is really interesting. It has become known almost entirely by word of mouth. Now, thankfully, there's people like yourself with podcasts who are looking a bit harder than everyone else and saying people need to know about this because genuinely it's a zero cost opportunity. Why wouldn't someone at least look at it? But generally speaking, the big opinion leaders, the big influencers, they actually refuse to talk about it. It's a strange thing. It's very tricky and it's problematic, and I don't know why it exists the way it does. It's a real shame. But yeah, I mean the site is at 12,000 people, and now I've completely lost track of the question. What was the original question?
Well, with Get It Made, your
Okay.
collaboration, I'm assuming they saw your site and thought you'd be a good fit.
They did. They were one of the interesting. Usually, I reach out to people. I reach out to people out there. I reach out to the likes of Writer Duet, who we have a partnership with, and Script Hop, and people like that, and Pre-Write, and Stage 32. The unusual thing about Get It Made was they kept knocking on the Script Revolution door because a Script Revolution member had joined Get It Made, become had a good success as a result of that, and become closer to that platform. And they were looking at this and they were saying, well, Script Revolution and Get It Made, isn't that like a really good partnership? Isn't there a flow there between the two? And they kept banging on my door, and I kept like, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know, I have to really look at things before I would ever notify my membership about that because I'm incredibly protective of them. And then there was a thread on Stage 32 where all these people who were involved in Get It Made were saying all this positive stuff about their experience. And that to me will always catch my attention. When see a lot of motivated, positive writers, that's you got to go, okay, I'm going to pay more attention. So I ended up taking meetings with them. They turned out to be an absolutely lovely group of people that I really enjoy uh, talking with and working with. And yeah, we were like, this has to happen. You know, we've got great scripts, we've got a great platform that can turn them into proof of concepts. Let's see who on Script Revolution wants to get involved with that. So it's only recently kind of kicked off, and we've got these run of seminars coming up where I'm talking about various aspects of script writing with both Script Revolution members and Get It Made ex members.
So you said a series of seminars. So how many are there? Is there going to be like all at once? You can binge them. Are you going to release them separately?
They run on Thursdays at midday PST time. They're one a month, and we run through till July, covering various aspects. And they're all going to be recorded, and so people will be able to binge watch them later on if they want to. But they can come in and interact when they're live. And it's me and it's Matt Boda from Get It Made, who's he's got some films under his belt and he's a lovely guy, and kind of just talking about our real world experience.
Hmm.
This wonderful membership of people, they can actually get some candid advice, which is commercially orientated, which is logistically orientated and industry orientated ultimately. And our first one of those runs tomorrow. And yeah, if you're a Rockstar member on Script Revolution, you can register for free and join in.
Wow, so tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Tomorrow's the debut.
Yep, yep.
Oh my goodness, are you excited?
I'm really
This is kind of a
excited.
milestone for
I'm
you.
really excited. I love talking about the craft. I love conversations like we're having right now. I'm a writer trapped in a small room in the middle of England. I didn't get to travel out and see the last two films I made, getting made because of the travel ban. I love any opportunity to chat and have any feeling of community. And yeah, Matt's a great guy to chat with, as is the rest of the team there. So yeah, it should be fun. It's not going to be too serious, but it is going to be very realistic.
So, as a screenwriter, okay, watching something like this, who's kind of afraid of proof of concept. Oh my goodness, I have to be a filmmaker now. You talked earlier about not sinking all your money or, depleting your family and friends' bank accounts to do something like this. How can a screenwriter get a proof of concept made, to get it sold, especially if they think I'm not a filmmaker. I'm afraid to spend money on this. How do you bridge that gap and get a screenwriter over that mental block of, wait a minute, I'm entering something outside of my expertise?
Yeah, I think comfort's important, and I think being realistic about what you can and can't do is important. I think one of the toughest things for me running Script Revolution is, and I held back for quite a while, is ever recommending something which requires a much higher degree of financial input than most people are used to. Breaking into screenwriting is typically seen as something which is near to free in cost. It's speculative work, but generally speaking, most people have access to a word processor, and they can sit down, and as long as they've got the time, the life energy, they can produce a script. And a lot of people like to think they're going to make $1 million off that, and it is theoretically possible. And then for me, it's been really hard to go out and say, well, you can get posters made by someone on Fiverr, and that's going to cost you a bit of cash, and you can do this and you can do that. And in the case of proof of concepts, let's be real here. Let's be realistic. I'm not going to bullshit anyone on this. You're going to have funds to do that if you're going to do a high quality production. And yeah, I did say previously, be careful about where you spend your money. Be careful how how you deplete resources that are around you. Done right, this should be an investment, and it's smart to go into a platform like Get It Made, where you're getting mentorship from actual people in the industry, which is going to be far safer and a far more realistic investment than going out and trying it yourself, or worse, and I've seen this, getting sucked into a very predatory pitching industry. Now, I have this example I cite quite often. I had a director approach me with a script. They wanted it rewriting. The script wasn't great. They'd written it themselves. It was a first-time effort, you could tell. However, they had the most beautiful pitch documentation to go with this. It looked like it had come out of Paramount, Universal Studios, Sony. It was glossy. It had concept art. It just felt, well, it was a PDF, and it still felt gorgeous to look at. It must have looked epic when it was printed. The content was bullshit. The content was like referencing Mad Max 1 as an example of going out and making returns on an independent movie, which we've not seen a phenomena like that since 1977. It was a one-off then. It had attachments that had no value, and it had projections which were, quite frankly, as produced, absolutely ridiculous. Now, what was really quite tragic and sad about this was the director had spent all their money. He'd spent all his funds in this world of pitching and creating this pitch deck, and had no money to get the script rewritten. Well, what a sad predicament that is. And this is what happens for people, because it isn't script orientated, it's marketing and pitch orientated, is they just end up with all this glossy, this is a horrible term to use, but polishing a turd, right? and then going to investors
Hmm.
and dreaming that they're going to pay it all off. Well, no, that's going backward. So yeah, there's quite a predatory pitch industry opening up at the moment.
So, what is the price range of a well-made proof of concept film that you could present to a producer?
That's a good question. And I think it's going to vary for every single different filmmaker out there, because some of us have access to red body cameras because we know an operator with one, right? Some of us are going to have access to a great sound person, or we're going to have access to that sound gear ourselves. Some of us are going to know actors. I think, if you are a film school student or an ex-student and you're close with people like that, maybe you've made short films before, you could probably go out there and do it for pizza money. If you pull in enough favors, if we get outside of going and getting mentorship and things like that. So it's a very much a case of how long's a piece of string. I'm the kind of producer that goes and makes stuff that looks like it costs at least 10 times more than it actually does. That's the reality of film. One person can do it incredibly cheap, the next person can't, but you can maximize your odds by how you write that proof of concept. If you write a proof of concept which is going to be set in your own home, a location that you can use easily, or maybe there's some good production value local to you, there's some incredibly beautiful places you can use, and maybe you can pull in a few favors, then you're going to get an advantage. So sadly, not that's not an answer I can give any kind of clarity on. I do know of short scripts out there where people have spent six figures making short scripts out there, which are effectively proof of concepts. I know of some Hollywood royalty where the script writer got paid more than a WGA writer because he's a friend of the family churned it out. So I've seen everything out there. I really have seen everything out there. So I think if you don't know how to do it, don't do it. Go join a platform where you learn how to do it. And if you can't afford it, go and put your energy somewhere else. Go and network like crazy. Go and find a different advantage.
One thing people think they can save money on is actors. You mentioned acting school. I think that makes the biggest difference. Get the best actors you can who actually look like the character, who are close in age and look. I think that's the number one production value is, especially if they're doing dialogue, you want someone to really bring your dialogue to life.
Oh, that is so true. I think one of the most breathtaking things I had on set watching a film get made, from my words, is watching how a particularly talented actor could take something that I could never read as well, even though I wrote it, something that I imagined in my mind being read exceptionally well, and then do it even better. It's such an art form. It's so magical to watch take place. And yeah, it makes so much difference to the quality of a production. It's remarkable. It should never be underestimated. And, I talk about it
Mm-hmm.
in my book. You're plugging the book, plugging the book. You know, Go and read some Shakespeare out loud. Go and read some Shakespeare out loud yourself and see how you butcher it and how you go too fast and how you fail to enunciate in the right places and make it poetic. And then go and watch a YouTube video of someone on the West End or in Broadway doing it properly. A talented person who really knows how to
Mm-hmm.
speak do it, and watch how they deliver their lines and how different they are. Something I've come to accept as a writer is some of my hackiest work can sound absolutely incredible out the right actor, and there is one or two out there that I am incredibly indebted to because they have transformed my work and taken it to a whole new level.
From someone who's been part of the low budget film world and churned out a lot of stuff really fast, it's hard for me to think of putting that money into a proof of concept where with just add a couple extra days, you've got the location, you've got the actors. Why not just churn out the whole movie?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's a that's a realistic, viable option for a filmmaker who can actually get things made. And I think that yeah, if you have the resources, you have the talent, I mean, and the funds, the budget to do it, and yeah, I mean, go out and do it in a low budget way. But let's be honest, Kelly, most people want to shoot for the brass ring. They want to be Hollywood royalty. They want to walk the red carpet. They want the glitz, the glamour. They want the bangers. They want the big marketing campaign. They want the top talent and everything else. That's where a lot of people, I think, anyone who is willing to do that, I think they already would be doing that, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're not going to quite wrap up. I want to cover the book a little more.
Cool.
I want to talk about the movies that have been produced. And then when we wrap up, I want you to predict the future for me.
Okay,
so start getting your psychic energies attuned. Because I think the Brits are more psychic than Americans, aren't they?
Well, yeah, we have psychic classes at school, and we work on that. You know, and we've still got a lot of pagan religion over here. So I will have to sacrifice a goat, and I'm vegetarian, so that's very difficult for me.
Have you ever been to Stonehenge?
I've been past Stonehenge. I've never actually been there. No. But the thing about England is you kind of bump into weird little things like that all the time. Some of them are filming locations as well, so it's very hard to get away from, even if you want to.
How can you pass Stonehenge and not stop at Stonehenge?
Because of traveling down south, and it's a 5 or 6 hour journey in traffic, and you just want to get there. And I don't know, I've never been too interested in walking around a bunch of rocks piled up. I'm not gonna lie, maybe if I do actually go, I would have an epiphany and I would have a spiritual moment. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I can walk around here and bump into weird old relics, and well, that's just the old people. But yeah, there's some half deconstructed buildings and chapels. And in my little town here, our church was built by Augustus Pugin, who did the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. So it's always around the corner. We've got an oak tree which is chained up, which was a curse put on someone by a witch. It goes back hundreds of years. We have a country rich in that kind of culture.
Wasn't it up until maybe 10 or 20 years ago you could come up right up to the rocks at Stonehenge, and then at some point they put some barriers? Wasn't there some vandalism or something?
I think it got weird, and I think there was there's some quite ritualistic stuff going on there as well that they kind of frown upon. So yeah, it's become a very quite strictly protected site, and they're talking about building a tunnel under there as well, so vehicles don't go anywhere near it either.
You don't think there's already tunnels underneath it?
I mean, come on. Imagine what they might find. I guess it's just an excuse to dig underneath and find out that the stones go all the way down. And I don't know, then there's like a giant straw man style mannequin who's going to climb out of there and avenge some kind of witch from the past, or maybe the reincarnated spirit of an executed king. Let's hope so.
It's like in From Dusk Till Dawn at the very end.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Thing
that matte painting, and you've got all the vehicles piled down the back of the pyramid, the old Masonic pyramid. Yeah, very cool.
I was hoping when I mentioned Stonehenge graffiti, you would under your breath say, "Bloody wankers."
Bloody wankers. Oh yeah, yeah. You don't go. Yeah, it's a bit of a tosser thing to do, to go out and graffiti Stonehenge.
Oh, tosser. I like that
Maybe
too. What's the difference between what's the difference between a wanker and a tosser?
It's a good question. Technique, maybe. I'm not sure. But it implies the same form of self-love.
See, if you want to sell a script to Guy Ritchie, it needs to open with two guys having a discussion about the difference between a wanker and a tosser.
I hope to see that one day, because we'll know where it started, won't we now, Kelly? We'll know what will have inspired that. But yeah, I love that. That's a proper hangout movie style opening, that is. That's a great idea. I have a guy that I met on set and we call each other Wanker and Dickhead, because he visited England and learned about all these terms. So yeah, I love it when Americans learn about, because England has so many words for everything. It's such a bastard language, and we're quite creative swearers over here. It's kind of like our special thing.
Have you been watching the series Pennyworth?
I haven't now. I don't know anything about it, sadly.
Oh my! I think it's like a Batman origin story about Alfred.
Oh wow!
You know, the butler, like his early days in his 20s, but it takes place in the 60s.
Cool.
And I think you'd like it. It's there's a lot of action, there's a lot of violence in it, but even though I guess it must be a DC universe based upon a comic, it just has a really cool action film feel to it. Crime and it's actually torture but crazy characters and larger than life, and I don't know, just made you want to be part of. Is there a tradition of action movies in the 60s in England?
Yeah, I mean, we had a series called The Avengers, which was made into a movie, and The Avengers was a TV
Love
version.
The Avengers.
Right, cool, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up on The Avengers, and yeah, I mean, it was kind of a lot of Bondism, which has kind of trickled down into various areas, and as you know, Avengers is like TV Bond, except you've got a female protagonist, Miss Peel, and in various other incarnations of her character, so to speak, and Emma Peel, and yeah, I mean, they were cool, they were campy, but they were very addictive to watch and very progressive in terms of like fashion and style and things like that, and yeah, and we had series like the Thunderbirds, for example. Thunderbirds was marionette based, which has always seemed ridiculous, but then Jerry Anderson just completely went 11 out of 10 on the whole thing and created some incredible action-based TV in a time, when that was unusual. And then Flash Gordon, which inspired Star Wars, effectively was, Star Wars was originally a Flash Gordon movie concept, apparently, allegedly. So yeah, we had some pretty cool 60s action out there.
Was Space 1999 filmed in England?
Yeah, it was Jerry Anderson again.
That was from the 70s.
Yeah, that was later on, so that was after Thunderbirds, and that was a great series, and that is quite a deep. They covered some really quite dark stuff in that. That's when they started using live action. I forgot the main protagonist's name, the guy that runs the department in that, but I remember watching an episode where he had 2 spaceships he was able to save. Well, there was one. Basically, he has to decide whether or not, I think, a family member dies in an awful crash, and he has to choose between 2 ships, and he chooses correctly. Statistically, it's the classic trolley dilemma, that you see the meme of on the internet, with the trolleys coming down the track. It can go down 1 or 2 tracks. You control the signals. What do you choose? Which is the less impactful? The best of the worst situation. And yeah, it got pretty dark. Yeah, we grew up on a lot of that. I got well into Thunderbirds, and I'm a big fan of all the art concepts and model making by Mike Trim. I think that guy is a futurologist, just absolutely amazing. I can't get enough of that. It still feels futuristic even today.
Well, your company specializes in female-driven action films. And I do consider a lot of sci-fi action films as well.
Good.
People say Star Wars is, an action film disguised as science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
It's a lot more Flash Gordon than Star Trek, which I think had a lot more what-if concepts, But, hearing you talk about your love of Thunderbirds and these other things, Emma Peel, an early, I would say, almost action icon. What formed your ideal, action heroine? What were the landmark movies or just inspirations for that?
They're very cliche. They're not particularly original. But I was born in 1979. I think a lot of this is starting to have an impact on me by the end of the 80s. So I was watching movies that had made it to TV and video. So, obviously Alien with Sigourney Weaver, Terminator, you know, but so it's a fascinating thing. I got into carsploitation in particular. I've got this deep love of exploitation, so I got into carsploitation quite earlier, and I always feel like they represented women well. I mean, yeah, they objectified, and I think both genders enjoyed watching the objectification.
Wait, car exploitation?
Well, I'm such a big fan of exploitation. You've got grunge exploitation like yourself. You've got black exploitation, car exploitation, sex exploitation. You got all these different.
But what's car? But what's car exploitation? Like with cool cars?
Yeah, Vanishing Point, Cannonball Run, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, and
so like road movies.
Yeah,
like with sports cars, they're fleeing the law. Like on the road.
Absolutely,
kind of
man. Liberty all the way. Don't listen to the man anymore. We're going out there and we're sticking it to them. And, cars are so representative of freedom, form of self-actualization, representation. They contain so much theatre and they're so exciting. And, yeah, I mean, you look at these films, Cannonball Run, Carquake, Death Race 2000, Smokey and the Bandit. They all had fantastic female protagonists in there. Very rarely a lead. I think one of the best examples, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. And these women I think they came across really well. They were well-rounded characters. They often represented, complete hedonistic freedom. They weren't abused. They weren't victimized. They weren't punished for who they were in any way. And the opening of Cannonball Run, two women in a Lamborghini Countach, the fastest car by far in the whole tournament, the one that wins in the end. These two women, and all they do is drive. And yeah, I think they objectify themselves. That's kind of the gag when they get pulled over, and they kind of own their sexuality to get out of a ticket. But then they get their comeuppance when they get pulled over by a female officer. And I grew up with a lot of that. So I grew up with women who were quite independent, forthright, who drove fast cars, who shot guns, who fought their corner, often quite broken and damaged in some way, looking for something kind of, there's an emptiness to them. And you could argue to a degree quite masculine in a way in the world they were in, but approach things with a feminine mindset. We talk about space, in action movies, and it's not a sci-fi movie, it's an action movie in space. And Alien, to me, that's a contained horror in space. That's a monster in the house. And I think one of the reasons why that works so well is because of having a female protagonist in that. I think it was inevitable. If you're going to do a monster in a house story, got to have a female protagonist, because that's the person you kind of most sympathize with or empathize with if you're female. And they're the most vulnerable person there, and often the one who's taken the least seriously. And that's the kind of beauty of stuff like that, and of course has to fight the monster on their own terms at the end. So yeah, I grew up with all the cliche, all the normal stuff. And every decade we seem to say, hey, we're having a strong female character revolution. And you just think, well, go back and look at the films that were being made in the 70s, because in the early 90s, they're better. Thelma and Louise, legendary still now. We still don't seem to be able to do better than that.
Well, you mentioned Death Proof earlier, Quentin Tarantino. You must have loved that.
Dude, I know I sound like a teenager who's trying to be edgy and different to everyone else, but Death Proof to me is quite possibly my most favorite Tarantino movie, because it gave us a little taste of who someone like Tarantino would have been if they hadn't had all that good luck and kind of hit the market at the right time with Dogs in the early 90s, or more importantly Pulp Fiction in the mid 90s. I feel like Death Proof is pure unadulterated Tarantino. That's the guy we would have had. He would have been churning a movie like that every year. you know, and just having fun, like Dusk Till Dawn you mentioned earlier. That to me, that's more Tarantino than anything else in many ways. It's not pretentious, it's just fun, it's pure good old fashioned entertainment. So yeah, I mean, Death Proof as a carsploitation fan, something I'm really keen on and getting to play in this space a little bit more now are female actors who do their own stunts. So Zoe Bell riding the hood of that that Challenger, just epic to see her up there. It's the actor doing the stunts, and they employed a young female stunt driver, Chrissy Weathersby Ball, to drive the car as well. So they gave a chance to a new young entry into that, and yeah, I cannot get enough of it.
Well, you must be a fan of Russ Meyer's Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Dude, I forgot the impact Russ Myers had on me. And you know what's funny is at the time, Russ Myers was considered, you know, chauvinistic, you know, and everything else. And now, of course, considered a you know, part of a feminist empowerment movie, because if you watch those movies, those women are incredibly empowered throughout them. Yes, he had a certain taste for a certain figure and focused on that. You know, that's not necessarily where my appreciation lies with it all. But dude, I mean, opening on those friggin' speedsters racing across the desert with the women behind the wheel, I mean, that to me, the impact that had, you know, I mean, that's what makes a car sexy, I think. You know, the car looks damn sight sexy with a young woman driving it, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, they were cool. I remember the go-go dancing scenes in the openings of you know, in a club and things like that, and I loved that. I love that. I'm not going to pretend I don't.
Well, if you want to think of the history of that, you know, the juvenile delinquent movies of the 50s, you know, and Rebel Without a Cause. But then it got interesting when it got to the low-budget knockoffs, the drive-in movie versions. I remember one called Hot Rod Girl. You know, there's like kind of like the drag racing, or no, it's like Drag Strip Girl or something.
I think I know the one you're talking about. Is that the one where they terrorize a family who are just trying to drive across the state? And there's this guy. I
think so. Yeah.
There's this awesome shot of the hot rods racing along the highway, and it all focuses around this kind of converter. I think it's a Corvette that's kind of souped up with a big roll bar on the back, and she sits up in the beauty queen seats, and it's what they actually call it in the supercar industry, and it's called the beauty queen test. And she hangs onto that thing, and there's an amazing shot of that thing flying along the highway with another car beside, and she's hanging onto that thing, and the kind of old-fashioned kind of yee music's going for it, and it's kind of bongos, and oh, I love it, man. And it's puffing out blue smoke because they've kind of blown the heads on this thing already, racing it around the desert. And yeah, I mean, to me, that's a lot of fun. Doesn't she lob a beer can at a kid at about 70 miles an hour? It's pretty reckless.
These people, and it was just, I loved how they were always couched in like a cautionary tale. They were pure exploitation, but they had this veneer of respectability because they're kind of warning you.
Yes.
You know, if you go down the wrong path, you'll become one of these juvenile delinquents.
Absolutely. It was kind of, these people are hoodlums, they're terrorists, they are ruining community and everything around us. And yeah, I mean, you generally speaking, when you watch exploitation, you're kind of watching one or either side of that. You know, you're either seeing it from the hedonist point of view, you know, Easy Rider, let's stick it to the man, dude, and smoke some pot, or you're seeing it, like you say, from the uptight side, which is like, hey kids, this is fun to watch, but don't go and do it.
We live in a really challenging time because people who like these types of films, it's like, okay, are they politically correct? Are you just doing like an homage? Are they empowering? At what point does empowerment become exploitation? You're a man writing female-driven scripts. Some would say, you can't do that. You know, a woman has to write it. And I think part of it is, in this day and age, if we're losing a lot of humor when it comes to art. Yeah. We can't laugh at ourselves as much. And just the joy of these movies, you mentioned Death Race 2000, I'd be horrified if a modern audience took all that at face value,
because there's so much satire there. People don't realize a lot of these movies, there was a subtext, and it was satire, it was social commentary, and a lot of it was just for the fun of that moment.
Absolutely, dude. I mean, I can sit on something like a platform like Tubi, and I can watch old, what people would consider B movies, although technically they often weren't B movies at the time. Like, for instance, Roger Corman never made a B movie. They were always the A side of the ticket. They were the main feature. But I can watch those all day long, you know, A Boy and His Dog and things like that, because they're thematically rich. And usually these people, you know, the guys who are, sorry, the guys, I mean, they almost always were guys, let's face it. But the people who were making these films, you know, they were big fans of the art films that were coming out of Europe and things like that. You know, Roger Corman was, 50% of his business was European art films. And yeah, they had meaning. They had a point to them, and they had some quite deep and rich themes. And it's really easy to laugh them off because they were using the tales of, you know, other people's reels, so that the color temperature would change randomly throughout the movie, or, you know, maybe the dialogue was badly recorded, so it would pop and bang and echo, and people would laugh at it because they were cheap and nasty. But actually what they were saying was quite profound, and that's why I love watching them for inspiration. And what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to take that kind of theme and take it into the future, make it more progressive. I call it next exploitation, which is kind of, you know, trying to take us to a new level. And I, as I mentioned in my book, I went through a time when I was really self-conscious about the fact that I am a man who likes to write women. And what's been wonderful for me is all these female actors saying, geez, this is like some of the best stuff I've ever had the chance to do, and it feels so feminine. I had a female assistant on the last production break down and cry as they were shooting the finale because she felt it was so incredibly feminine in the way it was, the way the characters were behaving, the two female leads. But something I always come back to, for me personally, is one of my favorite films in terms of representing men is American Psycho. And American Psycho was directed by a woman. Another one I really like, which I think really kind of goes into a more sexual side, is The Secretary, which was adapted by a female screenwriter. And, you know, it's just something I've come to learn, is that art needs voices that view the subject from every angle, often from the outside in. And there's definitely some value in someone who isn't writing it from within the box. And that goes for everything.
You know, the channel Shudder had a nice interview series where I think it was mostly directors, but they interviewed Mary Harron, the director of American Psycho. And I love how she articulated doing that. I loved hearing from her point of view, because talk about something that really got raked over the coals at the time.
Right.
And now it has a much bigger appreciation. People forget what the reception was like back at the time. And I think all the critics who didn't realize it was directed by a woman, suddenly when they learned it was directed by a woman, had to backpedal on a lot of their criticisms.
So true. And we go in and we judge based on, you know, I don't want to say it's superficial, because I think that kind of maybe disrespects the point, but you know, on some quite pragmatic values, and we decide how that impacts things artistically. And yeah, I think it was a revelation for me too. I didn't watch that movie knowing that it was a female director. That was something I learned later in life when I was reading about the trivia about, you know, and he kept mentioning she did this, she did that. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But what interested me about American Psycho is the die-hard fan base for that I see on women. And I think that's really interesting. And I think this is a female perspective on men behaving as psychopathic animals. And I think that really connects with a lot of women in a way. And yeah, I see so much fandom for that film from women, which probably seems ironic now compared to the time when it was seen as sexist, misogynistic, and objectifying.
Do you think we've gotten to the point
where our expectations are so high with representation, as opposed to you could write a script, there's one lead and she is one person, but she is now supposed to represent all of womanhood, as opposed to, this is one individual with their own personality and quirks and character traits. But now we've got this, microscope that just dissects things so heavily. And if you're not checking off a certain number of boxes in a protagonist, oh no. And why have we gotten so far away to say, sometimes a character is just a unique individual that does not represent everyone. Sometimes a hero or heroine is flawed. That doesn't mean you think all women are this way. You're not making a general statement. You're just saying, what? I'm creating a slice of life that has a lot of gray area in it.
I mean, gray area, that's a great way to kind of button that up. We've become too puritanical about art. And we've gotten to the point now where you have to be prepared to be offended if you're going to walk around the gallery. And if you can't handle being offended by what you see, you need to leave. You do not have a place in the art scene. You are coming at this is a political standpoint. You have to accept all voices, and this has become incredibly problematic within the university scene now, within the schools. Ironically enough, seems to be impacting women quite harshly as well. But yeah, with this puritanical views kind of getting a bit ridiculous to the point now where we're kind of defining who people should be and not really accepting ugly sides or different sides or alternative sides to being. For instance, like we say, well, this is pressure on a female lead representing all of womanhood. Well, there's tremendous amount of argument within third wave feminism itself as to what womanhood really entails, and there's a lot of back and forth. Mm-hmm. And what I find absolutely fascinating is collaborating with female artists, and we're talking at every level, from female artists that are working, as producers, to assistants, to costumers, to, of course, the actors themselves, and inviting them in and saying, what do you think and how do we develop this? And just sitting back and listening to that and building on it. What I love is I've had so few complaints. No complaints. I don't think I've ever had some female actors say this is not how a woman would react or do this. If anything, they've kind of really associated with that, which brings its own dangers, because I write very broken women, broken people in general, and that's fascinating, the impact it can have on an actor, because it can really open up some wounds for them. They really, if they go 11 out of 10, it takes a while to pack that bag in the bag if they can afterward.
See, traditionally, I see these two extremes with the female action protagonist. At the one end, it's a pretty lurid end. A film like I Spit on Your Grave, you've got a woman very victimized, the rape, revenge action film. And then on the other end, you have, the modern female superhero who's almost indestructible and a little bit unrealistic. They're not victimized, but they're so unrealistically powerful that it also suspends this disbelief. And I think, when you mentioned Terminator, the original, that was so believable because Linda Hamilton's character, she was this ordinary, person who suddenly gets thrust into this situation that she's not trained for. So you see fear and doubt, and yet you see her muster up something that she didn't realize she had. And you really rooted for her, not because she was superhuman, but because in spite of everything, she found strength. And I think there's this modern thing to strip away that vulnerability or to tack on superhuman qualities that
are a little bit unrealistic, and I think take away from that heroine's humanity.
Absolutely, and it comes from both sides as well. Is this refusal to show any kind of weakness, psychological, physical, or any other? And I think one of the most fascinating examples of this was the Charlie's Angels remake, because if you told me, if I didn't know who had made that film, and you said it was made by a bunch of frat boys who had absolutely no idea how to do this right, and basically had pandered to every kind of stereotype and done it in the worst way possible, I'd believe you. Because what was fascinating about that movie is it kind of became every negative trope which we said about what men do, about, you know, incredibly one-dimensional characters who were overly confident, who were smug with it, who could do incredibly unrealistic things. That was typically seen as men pandering to women and giving them what they thought they wanted, and kind of basic, I mean, I call it tits on a stick. You know, it's basically taking men and just giving them female names effectively, so it's just sexy male action heroes. And I thought that was fascinating to watch, the kind of horseshoe theory in action there, when you go to the extreme end of, you know, of female empowerment, that it can become almost a satire and a parody of what we consider, you know, female disempowerment. And you know, at the end of the day, we have to build incredibly well-rounded, deep characters. And something we can't forget here is, we talk about how this has impacted female characters. Let's talk about how it's impacted male characters too, because the 80s male action hero is absolutely ridiculous and has had a terribly negative effect on a lot of men that grew up in that generation, because we were told that men are completely indestructible too, and worse still, completely emotionally unavailable. You know, I mean, it's like the old Bond and, you know, the Schwarzenegger characters and things like that, where, you know, all they did was spit out one-liners, pick the girl up in their arms, and walk off at the end. They had no emotional needs or damage whatsoever, and you know that again. So we it affected everybody. I think maybe not equally, but it definitely affected everybody.
I think that's one reason why we like the original Die Hard so much, is regardless of what Bruce Willis has become, in that moment, he was this capable guy, but it was neck and neck. He was not superhuman. You know, he was just by this hanging by this thread the whole time, and it could have gone either way the whole movie.
Absolutely, he does come across as an everyman, and you know, throughout that movie, again, I mention this as an example in the book. He has an emotional need. He leaves. He parts with his wife on bad terms. He's come across from the East Coast. His wife seems to be moving on rapidly from him. She's become successful. She's more successful than him. She's in more exclusive circles than him. She's got, you know, attractive, exciting, rich men around her, you know, who I forgot the character's name that he plays in that. Who's the star of Die Hard? What's his name? I've forgotten. But
Bruce Willis?
Yeah, Bruce Willis's character. You see, we've overthought it now. We will never be able to think of his name until 15 minutes after this podcast has ended. But, you know, and there's people at home now screaming the name at us, which is unfortunate. Get those psychic things going. But yeah, he has emotional needs in that. And he's kind of spending that whole movie wanting to get back with his wife and, you know, tell her that he loves her. That's what he tells the police officer to do if it all ends badly for him. But I agree, physically vulnerable as well throughout that. Like he's like a cornered cat throughout, right? He's got no choice but to fight. And yeah, that was the old everyman hero, and we blew past that so fast. And you only have to look at the later Die Hard movies where he's firing taxis into helicopters off the divides before a tunnel. And it's like, okay, right, I know how to do that. Let's pull a fuse out of the pickup truck's fuse tray so we can switch off the ABS and spin it off a bridge. Yeah, I'm a guy, I know how to do that. All us guys know how to do that. Like, ridiculous, right?
By the way, when you were talking about the latest Charlie's Angels, I thought you were going to lead up to say, and on top of all that, it was directed by a woman.
Yeah.
To show that it's not just male directors objectifying women. Sometimes, and I'm sure a lot of it was the studio. And I do like Elizabeth Banks. I think she's a great actress, and I hope they give her another chance to direct. But throughout all this, and the press junkets and the interviews and female empowerment, and yet, how did it miss? How did it not become female empowerment, but more of just kind of almost mean-spirited?
It's strange, isn't it? And I know that Elizabeth went off and kind of blamed internet trolls immediately for rejecting the film, but then the film, it wore its politics on its sleeve, and it alienated 50% of its audience quite early on, and I believe it did alienate them. I don't think people are going to come with you if you make some of the statements that you make in an opening scene of a film like that. And I felt awful for that, the cast, and for Elizabeth Banks herself to then have to go on that tour, that press tour, and put on a brave face, which they did, and talk positively about the film whilst it's getting absolutely trashed. Again, I'll accept any day that studio interference may have stepped in and done that and really shot the whole movement in its foot. We saw it with Ghostbusters as well, and I know that people are going to be mad that I bring these things up. I have good intentions in terms of where things need to go. I don't think these things have helped us, and we need to find out why. We need to find out why a female-based development and production team still end up producing something which seems to send us backwards, rather not forwards. But just to credit where credit's due, in the case of Charlie's Angels, Kristen Stewart came across exceptionally well in that, and I think that she represented a side to femininity which really did seem to get picked up and hammered home. She deserves respect for that.
Well, we're going to talk about the book, and then you're going to predict the future, but real quickly, this flashed through my head. I'm going to predict you like this movie too, and I think it's one that kind of got that feel of Die Hard, a real nice husband-wife dynamic. The woman doesn't start out superhuman, but she finds a strength she didn't know she had. And that's True Lies, James Cameron.
Now, this is an interesting thing. I was going to bring James Cameron up. He's got a history of writing women very well. Very well. You look at The Abyss, female engineer. She's designed the underwater, the prototype underwater rig, and she's very proactive protagonist throughout in there. Obviously Terminator, which we mentioned, Aliens, again, Ripley goes to a whole new level. Some fantastic examples of her jumping in and taking leadership throughout that movie. Titanic, I think Rose is again a good protagonist. I don't think there's anything bad going on there. So yeah, True Lies, again, it was a great example with Jamie Lee Curtis in there, and and the way she's getting tempted away from her husband, she's having an affair at the start of that. She's getting drawn in by a bit of a con artist. So I do like that film, and on many levels, including the model making in it, exceptional model making with that bridge blow up at the end. The work that they did on that, absolutely fascinating, and a good humoured, fun film.
What's fun about it is, I think it does have a lot of female empowerment with Jamie Lee Curtis's character, but it doesn't deny us the fun things we expect from an action movie. Yeah. I love how it balances so much. It makes Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of James Bondish with this whole, undercover thing. It gives us helicopters and crashes and, pyrotechnics. It gives us that. It gives us, who's that actress? That's kind of the villain. She's, what's her name? Oh. She was in Wayne's World.
Oh. Tia Leone? Not Tia Leone.
No, Tia Carrera?
Could be, yeah, something like that. I remember Wayne's World.
Thinking?
Yeah, she's great. Well, this is the other thing, female antagonists, which is such an awesome role for female actors to play. there's all kinds of areas to play around in that. And yeah, I mean, we've had some fantastic female antagonists out there as well. And we still seem to be able to do that well without making it political or feeling that they have to I mean, because they're the negative representation, I guess. So they don't feel that they need to represent something political. But yeah, the art space has become incredibly difficult. And I just hope, I mean, I always say that worst case scenario, I'm doing this so badly, I'm going to be used as an example of how not to do it, and that will be my contribution to the art world. But everything I'm getting back is incredibly positive, and we're working with some incredible female actors at the moment, and particularly Danielle C. Ryan, who's just this who can do everything. She can fight, she can ride horses, she can stunt drive, and it's just unbelievable.
Okay, one other. You mentioned Cars. I thought of this when you said Cars and women. Basic Instinct 2, the sequel, which not as many people saw, but which took place in England. And it has a great opening scene. I actually really like this movie. The critics hated it. It was so different than the original Basic Instinct, but it did have Sharon Stone. Starts out in this really nice sports car. And Sharon is with this athlete, probably a soccer player, which you would call a football player. Mm-hmm. And they're just, I think they're doing coke, and he's driving at 90 miles an hour. They're going over this bridge, probably having sex at the same time. So, of course, which means they're going to have to go over the rail and crash. And it's got just this great, you want to talk, fast cars, drugs, and Sharon Stone, and death, and drowning. And I thought, wow, but the rest of the movie becomes a psychological thriller. But I thought these first 5 or 10 minutes, this was pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about the first Basic Instinct and Sharon Stone driving that, I think it's a Lotus Esprit or something similar to that, and she's racing our guy, and he can barely keep up, and she's weaving around oncoming traffic. I think at one point he ends up driving on the sidewalk up a staircase by accident, trying to follow her, and I that's good stuff to me. I hadn't watched it before. I ended up watching Pretty Woman, and in that, we've got this male protagonist, and he can't drive a stick shift. He's trying to drive an Esprit in that. And she jumps in and takes control. She starts talking about, hey, this car's mid-engined, it's British made, it's light. And I love touches like that. I think, they've always been there. I'm not sure if we ever really went so wrong, or we just felt like we went wrong, or we were looking at the wrong movies, maybe. I don't know how we've ended up on this quite negative and cynical track now.
There's this Australian movie, and I think it had a really dopey title, like Wet and Wild Summer or something like that, but it had Christopher Atkins, and then that Australian actor who was in Nip Tuck. So like early, before all that, probably early 90s. And I just remember one scene, it was like a sex comedy or sexy comedy with lifeguards, but there's this scene where Christopher Atkins is walking across the street, and this guy on a motorcycle almost runs him down, in this black leather and big black helmet. And he goes, hey, buddy, what are you doing? And they stop and take the helmet off, and it turns out to be a sexy woman, and he's going, whoa, and she's going, well, you watch where you're going. And of course, they become romantic later, but playing off that whole idea of, when you can't see the face and you're making that assumption it's a man first, but then you realize, no, it's a kick-ass woman on a motorcycle in black leather.
Yeah, and there's no... I hang around with a lot of female bikers, and I think a lot of them are inspired by things like that, to go out and pursue freedom on their terms on a bike and, wear leather and everything else. It's a shame that stuff like that has to be overanalyzed, and people have to try and find issue with it seems.
Do you like playing with that expectation and then surprising people?
Well, we've done it in the last movie. The last movie, the movie we're just locking up, Night Train. It opens in a similar way to that. the reveal, and it's like, oh, it's a girl, and yeah, I like doing stuff like that. What I particularly like doing is putting women into roles where you wouldn't expect it, particularly with minor characters. Like, for instance, when it's a cop or a doctor or an accountant or whatever, that doesn't need to necessarily be male, but we default to male, and you can really add quite a richness to a movie, because it's one thing casting a couple of female leads and then everyone else is male. And this is the issue we see. And we really managed to do it well with Break Even. Like, in Break Even, the drug dealer is female. The two street kids who are buying the drugs are female. The money launderer is female. Like, we did this all the way to, I think, the point where it's about 50% male female casting, and it's quite an achievement to do that on top of having your female leads. And that's where I particularly like to do it, because they walk in to get tires balanced. Who's doing the tire balancing? It's female. It's a female mechanic. And I know working real female mechanics. Like, it doesn't need to be done in a pandering way. They can just be normal and casual and just like getting on with their job. I think sometimes it's overdone, and they have to really kind of say, hey, you have to kind of lampshade the whole thing. It's a woman. And I'm like, if you can just be casual about it and just have it as a matter of fact, I think that's quite powerful, because it doesn't draw attention to it as being weird. Because this is a fascinating phenomena here. The more that we go out and say that female directors don't stand a chance, that female actors don't stand a chance after 30, the more we say it and talk about it like it's inevitable, the more of an inevitability it becomes, because it disenfranchises, disempowers, and demotivates the very women that can go and make that happen. So we have to try and talk positively about what can be done rather than what can't be done.
Switchblade Sisters.
Switchblade. I don't know Switchblade Sisters. I might have to check that one out.
See, when Tarantino hit it big, he made some deal and had his own home video line, where I think with the studio they let him pick some of his favorite movies that influenced him. And there's a special line, and even on the box, the VHS on top, I think you could see Quentin Tarantino's head, and it said like Quentin Tarantino Presents or something. And I think Switchblade Sisters was maybe the first one. And when you watch it, you can totally tell how it influenced him. Had these real tough chicks.
Yeah, it kind of become the Fox Force 5, yeah.
And but it's funny is that they're equal opportunity harassers. They harass men, they harass women. I want to say there's a biker gang element to it, but I think that's the other thing when we talked about biker movies. There always was this element of, sure, it might be a male biker gang, but there's always like the girlfriends of the bikers, and they were pretty tough in their own right. And there's always the obligatory like catfight scene.
Yeah, I think what would have been hard to have kind of made that equal gender-wise back then would have been finding female riders back then with a bike who could come down and do that. And a lot of these very male-dominated areas. In our latest movie, we open on a car meet with some illegal street racing, and it is predominantly male, and it represents it realistically. You watch something like Fast and Furious. I'm not saying they're bad movies, but the way they, someone who used to street race and used to go to car cruises and still in that scene, you turn up to a car cruise, it's all dudes. It is all dudes. There is like 10% women in there. Some will be driving, some will be girlfriends, and that's just how it is. And I think that sometimes we can be a bit too idealistic to the point where it's almost a bit insulting. And when I see these Fast and Furious scenes, for example, sometimes, and there's just scantily clad women, beautiful, stunning women everywhere, and I'm just like, yeah, that is not realistic to, this is a nerdy, geeky thing, quite boring for a lot of people who aren't into it themselves. So yeah, I think back then it would have been very tricky to pull out a load of female bikers, but there was a female biker movie, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was all female led. It was very Russ Meyers-esque. sort of concept.
Sybil Danning. So an actress like that only comes, across once a generation, and actually is so influential. It's like filmmakers want to make movies just so they can make Sybil Danning either the kick-ass hero or the kick-ass villain, or remember back in the, I think, 90s, Cynthia Rothrock, wasn't she a martial arts champ? And they created great movies just to showcase her. So what do you think is the value of when these women come out, these actresses, who just create their own empire of being these kick-ass action heroes?
Well, I mean, in the case of Rothrock, you've got a Chinese production company, you've got execs, they come over to LA and they want to see some of the best martial artists that are on offer to take them back to China and make, I can't remember, it was Police something Police. I forgot what the movie was, the first movie was called that Rothrock did. And they saw all the guys, and Cynthia Rothrock was there. And when she did a performance for them, and showed what she did, and they were so blown away. She wasn't necessarily picked because she's female. It may have had an impact, but I mean, this is Chinese film production company, so maybe it would have been quite controversial. But either way, they were like, she's the best in the room. And when they go off, and interesting fact, in Double Threat, which is the movie which we're closing deals on now, and is hopefully going to be out at some point this year in summer. We have a martial arts scene. Like I say, Daniel C. Ryan is this amazing martial artist herself. And in the script, it specifically says that the character goes full Rothrock. And I actually gave the stunt team some of the Rothrock scenes, and I said, this is what we want. This is. I love the way she would fight, because I would tell she fights like a cat. There's no smugness. She hasn't got superhuman strength, beyond that of what we would see in a martial arts movie. She's resourceful. She's always nearly beaten constantly and keeps finding these edges to so she can kick, because that's where all her power is in kicking. And in one of the fights, there's this beautiful moment, and they're fighting in some kind of underground lair with this big metal object in the middle. I think it might be even a boulder. And she just runs into scene and just jumps off the springboards off this object and uses all her body weight to pull this big tall guy over. And it brings tears to my eyes, because she's giving it everything, every last ounce of body weight, and she's a pure disadvantage. So yeah, tons of respect for Rothrock and what she did. I could watch her scenes all day long.
I think for a while I had hopes with Sandel Bergman, who was in, I think, one of the Conan movies. And then Brigitte Nielsen from around that time. Yeah. She was in Red Sonja with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I liked it. Again, at the time, the critics kind of blasted it. I thought she was good in it, and I thought that was a really good niche for her. But she strayed, but I thought she had that physicality and that stature, just that natural. She read as warrior the minute she walked on camera.
Yeah, I think a lot of these movies, I think if you do want to go to kind of a misogynistic time, I think if you do go back to the 70s and you go back to the critical reception to a lot of those movies, I do think, and we see artifacts of this now, where people do just seem to be angry that there's women there at all, and that's a big issue. But I had a fantastic time during lockdown as a kind of little side project, and what I was doing was, Amazon over here had a ton of fantastic old, what people would call B movies, super low budget 70s movies, and it was edgy stuff, like really edgy stuff. Like they went all, it was like Cannibal Holocaust was on there, and I'm like, wow, they did not pull any punches. So I was watching all these great old movies I hadn't seen before, like Sisterhood, Satan's School for Girls, and things like that, and I was putting the actors on Instagram, things like Eat My Dust, with Christopher Norris. Christopher Norris, that was a female actor who was named Christopher Norris, and she's so much fun in that Roger Corman movie, and I would showcase them. So I went through a phase on Instagram of showcasing all these women from these kind of what people would call exploitation movies, because I think they're great examples.
Well, you mentioned the Charlie's Angels movie itself, the last one. Then there were the Drew Barrymore ones. But, you know, the original series, which was probably, I think, started in 76, give or take. And people forget, you know, they kind of dismissed it, or it seems campy after the fact. But at the time, it was a big deal. And when you look back on it, they were pretty tough. I mean, they did go neck and neck with the men, and you know, they weren't damsels in distress. You know, when it all came down, they'd whip out the gun. They would, you know, they would be pretty. I love the dialogue. You know, they were very direct with what they wanted. They said, you know, hands off. You know, hands above your head, hit the ground. And I just like that they were very assertive when they were interacting with the male villains on the show.
Absolutely. I think that was. I mean, everything was campy back then. Knight Rider was campy, and Starsky and Hutch.
I mean, even Starsky and Hutch. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. A-Team was campy, and I think also in quite a few of the male-led stuff is they had quite good female. There were side characters, obviously, but in Knight Rider, you know, the mechanic in Knight Rider was female, and she gave Michael Knight some crap. She was like Q in Bond, you know. She was like, you need to stop being an idiot and everything else, and you know, in Fall Guy and everything. And yeah, I don't take issue with it. I think there's something unfortunate, and it's when if you put women into a situation like that, into a series like that, and they're running around shooting guns, they're going to look feminine, you know, and they're going to run in a feminine way. They're going to hold themselves in a feminine way. And you have to accept that that's not going to look the same as big 6'2", 210-pound men are going to look doing that. It's just not. And I think that people can fall into the trap of kind of thinking it looks silly and thinking that it looks ridiculous. And well, it doesn't. Or maybe it does, and we just have to accept that. But it's strength of character above all else that matters. So yeah, I agree. Are we going forwards or backwards? With some things, it doesn't feel like we are going forwards at all.
To me, the strength of the female-led protagonists of that time, and you can group Charlie's Angels with, you know, the Bionic Woman, Lindsay Wagner, and then Wonder Woman, Linda Carter. They were all, you know, late 70s. And the thing about their protagonists were, yeah, when they had to fight, they fought hard and efficiently. But it was always this last resort. They weren't doing it for bloodlust. And they always were doing it because they wanted to uphold what was right. They were like Superman, you know, it was about truth, justice, you know, trying to do what was right. And I think when people lose their way, it's you get some of these modern female, you know, protagonists that are, you know, borderline psychotic, where they take the worst qualities of the male heroes and they just become sadistic, and it's they cross that line of losing their humanity.
And quite often, whilst being objectified quite heavily at the same time, whilst also being pandered to. This is what frustrates me. I remember getting quite angry and upset at the girl with the dragon tattoo, because there's a rape scene in that, and she has to be shown. She has to be naked. We have to be able to see, you know, her carefully sculpted and, you know, carefully pampered body, and it has to be heavily sexualized. And then when she goes and gets revenge, it's completely different. Similar in Bombshell, for me, suffered the same problem. It's like you've got a TV anchor, an aspiring TV anchor in that case, being sexually preyed upon by, you know, someone high up in the Fox News organization in that story. And rather than focus on his leering and how gross that is, she still has to roll her skirt up. We still have to see underwear. We still, like, why? I don't understand why we still have to do that. showing her, sexually objectifying her for the story just isn't going to change anyone's opinion. They're just going to go, oh wow, it's thighs and underwear. But if you focus on the gross side of things, on the guy, like that's where the focus should be. And like maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but that's my issue a lot of the time is that we do that, and we definitely do that with those bad kind of sadistic characters that come out from now and then. You know, I like like I say, I like a cruel antagonist. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, they sometimes do become protagonists.
Did you see Red Sparrow with Jennifer Lawrence?
No, it just felt like getting naked for the sake of getting naked in that one. That was enough for me to just not go near it. But I won't watch anything like that now. I don't even set myself up for the disappointment that it's going to be, because I know it's going to be faux. I know it's going to be painful. I know it's going to be insulting and pandering and probably moving things backwards rather than forward. And maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but that was my own personal feeling toward it.
Yeah, that's one I watched without reading about it first or knowing about it. It's very different than the poster, I thought. It's funny that after the fact I read it was based on a book. So it's one that maybe the book has a lot of insight. I didn't hate it, but what struck me about it, and it's basically about a Russian ballerina turned Russian sex spy. Which actually, I think if it had been like a trashy, low-budget exploitation movie, it could have been kind of fun, but it was this big-budget, super serious movie. And I think a lot of these, when you take the fun element out, it just becomes like just dark and dire to watch. But what really got me about it, her character gets recruited to be part of this network of attractive young adults who use their youth and sexuality to seduce important people and get, you know, secret information from them and compromise them, and you know, but it's like they have this sex school for them where they teach them how to be seductive and use their sexualities, both men and women. And what's kind of weird is, you know, Jennifer Lawrence's character really didn't need this training because she was already sexy and, you know, proved she could do it with her first little mission. But the fact that they had to show this, the training, and show them naked and doing all these things, they could have just implied that, and you would have known, it would have been fine for the story. You knew that they had to go through this to, you know, be trained. And I thought, wow, even for an exploitation movie like, you know, those Italian women's penitentiary movies from the 70s.
Oh, yes.
Which had a lot of gratuitous shower scenes, you know, and evil wardens and all that. Even for a movie like this was pretty lurid. And the fact they got, you know, a big star like Jennifer Lawrence to do it, I thought, at what point is this going too far? And there's even parts later on with some very sadistic, torturous scenes where Jennifer is like peeling the skin off people, and it was pretty grisly. And it got me to thinking, wow, even for me, who has a pretty strong stomach for this, and I've seen a lot, I was thinking, wow, at what point does the story need all this?
It's so true. And I feel, you know, going back to what you said, it's like if the film... the film takes itself too seriously, right? This is the problem, and it's this attitude of wanting to kind of have your cake and eat it. So it's like, let's do a sexy exploitation, female-led sexy exploitation movie, but then let's try and do it in a modern way that kind of rejects everything that it's based on in terms of its kind of self-awareness. And I just feel like that's an impossibility. It kind of becomes paradoxical. And then you say, well, what makes this female empowerment? And then someone will say, because I say it is. And that's all it seems to come down to, is kind of having the what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of social clout and support to be able to stand up and say, oh, well, this is empowerment and you're wrong. And that isn't empowerment, because we've kind of gone through these mental gymnastics to say as such. And like that's why I say that I just start to sometimes I find it quite insulting.
Well, going back to Terminator, when they got to Terminator 2 and Linda Hamilton's character, a few years had gone by, there was some evolution, and they were implying that she went through some pretty horrible things in this mental hospital, which toughened her up even more. And so it did make sense. I mean, suddenly she was going into more superhuman mode, this lean, worked out physique, but it was still plausible. But they didn't have to show you every degradation she went through in this mental hospital to get her to where she was at. And that's where you make these choices. You want to show the motivation, but how long do you linger over these things?
It's so true. I mean, you just wonder what the motivation is sometimes. Like, there will always be graphic, explicit sex scenes, for example, and there will be, like you say, these kind of violent scenes as well. There's this great thing about Linda Hamilton's character in Terminator 2, and it's that everything she does, she messes up. Like, everything. If you actually watch it and you look for it, she fails at every point. And I'm not saying that to kind of neg her character or female characters, but because there's something really quite admirable in the tenacity that continues when you just continually get, you're trying your hardest. She goes to escape, she runs straight into a Terminator. She's almost all the way out there. Every time she tries to fight back, something goes wrong. She goes to assassinate the guy who creates, who repairs the chip and creates Skynet, and that goes wrong, and she breaks down emotionally throughout that scene. And I love that. Everyone loves an underdog, right? Everyone loves someone who's not winning in an easy way. And I feel that the way we went wrong is we kind of said, well, no, they're not allowed to struggle through weakness. They're not allowed to struggle through a part of the character development they've not gone from. They have to struggle against a patriarchal system. They have to struggle against misogyny. And I see that it comes out of male writers in particular. I read a lot of strong female character scripts in inverted commas from male writers, and it's just always the same. It's girls going along normally. She acts like a guy. She's not scared of anything. Oh, misogyny. Punch, 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 punch. That'll show them women are strong. And off she goes, because we have this fallacy of thinking that strong female character means being physically strong, when what it means having a strong character.
Well, it makes me think of the quote, courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's, taking that action in spite of fear.
Yeah, exactly. That's inspiring.
And don't you think, and Linda Hamilton acts in spite of her fear.
Absolutely.
But then you've got an Angelina Jolie action movie where she has no fear,
That's Salt, yeah. And a lot of people love Salt, but I feel like for me it's representative of that kind of smug side of things. And I don't know, maybe people like smug protagonists. I never have. I'm not interested in rooting for someone who is indestructible and fearless. I want to root for someone who's terrified and overwhelmed. I always would. I think that's fundamentally why I'm drawn to female characters, because I've grown up around women who have fought against that adversity and shown incredible strength in doing so. And you can't show a character growing if you don't accept that they're weak at some point.
Well, it's like, I think a really great modern male action protagonist, Liam Neeson in Taken, who is very competent, so there's no false weakness there. He's trained, he's already this tough guy, but it's situational. He uses that when it's called for. He doesn't use that as an excuse to be nasty to everyone in real life. And I hate it when that character, because they have this kick-ass ability, that's their license, to treat everyone in their path, good or bad, like dirt.
I think so. In terms of so we can do that. So we have to look at what's being countered. So one of the fundamental frustrations a lot of women have is that they have to be likable. They have to be nice all the time. Otherwise, they're rejected by society, and it's seen as an antagonistic trait to be anything but very nice, smiley, and polite, to the point of flirtation in a lot of cases. Which men mistake. So I think that what people have tried to do is they've tried to counter that with the whole "I'm not nice, I don't need to be nice, I don't have to be nice" type thing, which kind of gets quite tiring quite fast.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you look at male action hero protagonists, they tend to be funny, charming, charismatic, and likable for all those traits. And yeah, I think it's a difficult situation as to what people want to counter. Because if you're going in and you're saying this person doesn't need to be liked, they're willing to be unlikable, you've potentially got an unlikable protagonist. And it can be done. Payback did it. Payback with Mel Gibson did it particularly well, I think, in that case. But it's a fine line to walk. It really is.
Do you know the TV show Orphan Black?
Yes, I remember. I watched the first series.
I love that, and what's so interesting, it has a speculative fiction aspect, but a lot of action, and there's a lot of messes that she's escaping from or trying to combat the bad people. But what I like about it, because she has all these clones, in its own way, it's just a way to show all these different facets of being a woman, and what a great thing for one actress getting to play that. It's almost like, since it's a clone, it's showing the different aspects really of her psyche, if you really want to get in and analyze it. And it's kind of showing, to this extreme, a woman has to be the perfect homemaker, but to another extreme, she's this and that. But the core character that it's based on is this kind of like a flawed person. I mean, isn't she on the police force? And she's trying to make a difference. She's out there actively. She's heroic, but at the same time, not superhuman. It does such a good job of showing the strength and the self-doubt.
Absolutely. I remember enjoying Orphan Black. I can't remember when I tuned out or why I tuned out, because going back a while. But yeah, I mean, it taps into what we were saying before. You can't have a protagonist that represents a gender in its entirety. It's the same as you can't have male protagonists to do that. We favor I'm not going to say effeminate, but a less masculine lead in the stuff we do. And a good example of that was The Boys, that Amazon did, which is, for me, I can watch a superhero series like that doesn't take itself too seriously and is a bit edgy and a bit dark. And yeah, the male lead in that, he's just an everyday guy. He's quite weak. He's got a limp handshake, right? And the female love interest is Starlight. She's got all the strength, the power, the confidence, and everything else. So, yeah, I mean, again, it impacts everyone equally.
Tell me this. There's a fine line here, okay? Because I like snappy dialogue. We talked about Faster, Pussycat, Kill, Kill, and they had some snappy lines, and they were cynical, but it was fun. But there's a modern kick-ass action woman whose whole personality is based on being snarky. And it's just like this overload of, is that real? Even in a comic book style show or something that's just, so out there, there's got to be some other balancing element. And when people are just snarky and mean-spirited, you just want to shut down and not pay attention to them anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before, unlikable protagonist. And typically, women don't get to be snarky and, fire one-liners at people and put them down without, quite damning consequences. They become alienated for it. So, I think that it's compensating to a degree. But yeah, I think it was the Batgirl series or something like that suffered that quite badly. to the point like it drove away the audience. Like we don't like it's not pleasant to see that. Like there has to be some charm and some charisma, and even with a surly guy, it wouldn't work most of the time either. It's incredibly difficult to play. It's difficult to write. It's difficult to get the balance right at all if it's a protagonist.
Well, you've produced 2 films. And, you've seen one of them's released, one's about to be released. How have you crafted your female protagonists to not fall into some of these traps?
Well, I've produced 2. There's 3 films in total. So there was Break Even was my
Oh.
first film that I was a writer on, and then I've actually done 2 in the last 2 years that I'm producing partner on. That's Double Threat and Night Train.
Okay. Night
which has
Train is
given
the
me-
third. Night Train
Night
is
Train-
the...
Yeah, that's the one we
Okay.
just locked. We're about to lock an edit on, and Double Threats we're the one that we're kind of finalising offers on, deciding where to go distribution wise and US domestic. And yeah, I mean, I just continued my usual path with this. We had this fascinating situation with Double Threat, quite funny and ironic. When we did Break Even, we had so many female characters. We found it really difficult to cast. The problem keeps fueling itself because we don't have many female actors out there who are known and respected. It then means securing valuable talent becomes hard as well. You have to dig a lot deeper to find valuable talent that's female, and it comes at a higher cost as well because they're rarer to find, and it's tough. So when we did Double Threat, because we were on such an incredibly tight timeline, we went from basically agreeing to do the film to wrapping principal in 3 months. So we went from, I think it was the start of September to the end of December. On that one, mid-December, we wrapped principal.
And that
So we
includes
moved incredibly
casting.
fast. Oh,
That
dude,
includes
it was
casting.
fun getting funding, casting, writing the script, all of pre-production, everything. And this was during COVID, so it was even tougher than normal. We did it in record time. We decided to only have one main female character in that because we were working with Danielle C. Ryan. She's a producer on the film, and it was built around her. And we thought, well, we won't put a female protagonist in because it's so hard. We just don't have the time to do the running around, talking to agents, and trying to make this happen. So it was written with a dual, it was like an ensemble piece to some extent, and we had 2 main protagonists who were working together. They're going to be male. We couldn't find who we wanted, and ended up getting Dawn Olivieri, who's this incredible female actor. And she's just absolutely wonderful. She's just absolutely brilliant and just an absolute treasure to work with. And plays a fantastic villain. And yeah, it was weird. She kind of fell into our lap, and then I ended up watching all her reels and then rewriting this male character to be female. But when she signed on, she was basically told, hey, look, we want you to play this character. They're currently male. And she loved that. That really drew her in. She was like, oh, I'm 100% in if I'm taking a man's job on this, and I'll come in and do it great. And so I was able to rewrite all her dialogue in that to suit her, and that's been one of the best matches I've ever had in that regard in terms of my writing and an actor's performance. It's just been wonderful.
Wow. So the third one, Night Train. So what's the synopsis? What's your pitch for Night Train?
It's a young female teamster, single mom with a sick kid, who's relying on illegal meds from an outlaw in the Palm Springs desert, who has this souped-up diesel pickup truck which she's drag racing at night to make money. It's called the Night Train, surprisingly. And she realizes she can run this medication up to Vegas. So there's this kind of, she knows about this rare situation with police shift changes. The truck is the only truck, in the state, if not the country, that can do this. It can do 100 miles an hour flat out, hauling 5 tons for 3 hours. It doesn't even need to refuel, right? Legendary. and she jumps in and fills this spot, and of course, she gets wrapped in, we're pulled into, this kind of criminal underworld, and it all starts to spiral out of control because she's being pursued by this female FBI agent who's a real, she's a real old dog looking for a bone to chew on.
So in this, you finally just do an out and out car on the open highway with a kick-ass heroine.
You'd think so. It is more of a drama thriller, but it is an action film. We had a tough time. Cars are camera shy. We have the best car stunt director in the world, as a producer on the show, which is Mike C. Ryan. That guy, he's legendary, and we never have the money we need to do it, but we somehow get it done. And everything that could go wrong went wrong, and turbos were blown, and thermostats overheated, and a whole load of other issues. But we got it done. It has a great end chase. It's got some great bits in the middle. We've got some land speed motorbike stuff. It's a petrol head dream. It really is. It's something I've always wanted to do. It's got little bits of Cannonball Run in there. It's got a lot of Hal Needham to it. And I really wanted to go back and make one of those good old kind of 70s Americana movies. It's all about hedonism and sticking it to the man.
So as you get deeper into this, in the production side, all screenwriters secretly want to direct. Do you?
Eventually I do, yeah. I mean, I'd like to. I think there comes a point where the stuff that you're most precious about, you kind of realize that you need to become an egomaniac about. And you realize that the director's seat is pretty much the only place where you have the respect by default to do that. For some reason, I don't know why, writers are just considered like throwaway objects in the production. I've had different relationships with actors. I've had actors that I can walk up to and we'll rehearse scenes together, and I'll rewrite snippets for them, and we'll develop scenes, and I'll even there's been sometimes where I've even given a little bit of direction during takes, because I've been closer to them than the director. And then there's actors out there who've never even looked at me, looked me in the eye during an entire production, because I'm just the screenwriter. But they've read every line, as it should be. Things get changed. Some wackadoodle stuff can happen. People can get confused. People can get in each other's heads during production. Stuff gets changed. Worst of all, people don't fully understand why people are saying the things they're saying or doing the things they are doing. And I've tried my hardest to give people as much as possible. So, for instance, now when an actor gets a production script in FDX format, I put all the scene development notes in there. It's all there. They can go back, they can break it down, they know exactly why things are happening, and that's quite new for people, and I don't know if anyone even really looked. I'm very lucky. That said, I'm very lucky. I have a director who's totally on my wavelength, who keeps control of things, and in the last film, the last two films, barely a line gets changed, really. Barely a line gets changed. I'm very fortunate. But I do realize, at the end of the day, if I want it to be my show, my way, I have to sit in the director's chair. And that doesn't necessarily just mean more power. It means a hell of a lot more responsibility. So I'm hoping one day, maybe with my own money, I'm going to go do my little pulpy single location scripts that aren't particularly commercial. But at least I'll get to say what I want to say, how I want to say it.
Now, your director, who's also your producing partner, Chase, did he also
Shane Stanley?
I'm Shane.
Yeah, Shane Stanley.
I'm punch drunk. Shane Stanley.
We'd like to be called Chase.
Chase Scene. Wouldn't that be great to be an action director named Chase?
Yeah, it would.
Shane Stanley.
Would fit well. Yeah.
So he's not only directed your scripts, but you produce these together. So, what is the most important thing you've learned from him, from the directing standpoint?
I think it's Well, apart from coverage, because he's an editor. So Shane comes from an editing background. It's the same as, I mean, Roger Corman was famous for this. He wouldn't even call cut on some scenes because he couldn't afford the time for people to reset because he wanted so much coverage. So, a director who was an editor, they get so much coverage. So I call him Captain Coverage as a joke. But I think what I've learned more than anything, and this is going to sound so schmaltzy, it's kindness, it's empathy, and it's not running a set like a dictator. It's running a set like a parent, a good, decent, kind parent who is constantly, concerned and preoccupied with everyone's well-being, artistically, physically, and everything else, and empowers those people. And Shane's incredible in that respect because he will stop and he will listen and he will consider people's points. And what I love about Shane is if someone says, "Can I change something?" he will say, "Well, let's do it both ways." And then he'll get to the editing room and make the decision there. And that's something I've really learned, is rather than be resistant to change and be too precious, is to say, give me a take as per the script and give me a take with what you want to do with it. And then we've got both options. We do not need to choose today.
In pre-production, like, he likes your script, you're going to film it, and he's sitting down with you. What are just the practical, logistical things? I like this, but can we combine these scenes at this one location? How many of just the practical things have you learned to take a script just to keep your budget down and make it so you can film faster?
Break Even was like a boot camp for me, and I was constantly hyper aware of what was costing us time, what was costing us money, what was causing a lot of stress as well, and things like that. So by the time we'd gone into Double Threat, I'd already written a couple of scripts that we were hoping to make and still hope to make, but weren't the right scripts to make at that time. And during that process, Shane and I discussed in quite depth, like, is this possible? Can we do this? Where would we do that? And things like that. And what's been fantastic is finding out how much is easy. Like, for instance, I used to think that single location was so much easier than using multiple locations, and technically it is, but it's not that difficult to add more locations if they're the right kind of locations. And I learned that you never want to shoot in a store near fridges because they're going to buzz through your microphone. And moving from a daytime to a nighttime shift can be a nightmare, and things like that. And you don't want a white boat. You want a boat with a bit of color on it. Otherwise, it's going to look terrible on camera and reflect everything. And all these little things that you learn along the way, and kind of leaning into our logistical advantage. And that's where we've really become productive. So an example on Night Train is we've got some land speed stuff, and I originally wrote it car based, so it was the classic land speed cars out on El Mirage racing across the old riverbed. And Shane was talking to this with me, and he said, "Dude, I know so many bike people," because Shane used to ride Supercross and a whole load of other stuff in his kind of crazy life. And he's like, "Why don't we put her on a bike? Because I can talk to bike people, I can get sponsorship, we can get product placement, a whole other load of things." And I was like, "Dude, I don't care what she's sit in or on, I just want speed." And he's like, let me look around. And I think it was like within 3 days, he basically had secured Valerie Thompson, who's the fastest woman on 2 wheels, to come down and do some runs for us and bring the bike down and everything else. So yeah, we've got the fastest woman on 2 wheels in our film, doing 170-mile-an-hour passes on this souped up BMW sports bike across El Mirage, which is so on point with what we're doing, because this is a film about women and speed. And it's those little things where you know that you're advantage. We, KTM, Husqvarna, Gas, we had product placement from them. They came in and supported us, put some lovely bikes in some of the workshop scenes to flesh those out. So yeah, I mean, it's knowing where opportunities lie, and I always say, follow the path of least resistance.
Oh my God, it's like BMX bandits for the new generation.
That's British Australian guy. I read his book as well, but I forgot his John. Oh, what's his name? Yeah, BMX Bouncer is Nicole Kidman. Yeah, that was another great indie director,
Oh my god!
and one of Tarantino's favorites as well, isn't he?
It is.
I'm sure I
Well,
remember his name.
I think they touched upon that briefly. You know, the documentary about Australian exploitation films. Ozploitation, one of my favorite genres. Ozploitation. Okay, so we're getting down to the final thing. So this leads to Turn and Burn, and then the Scriptwriter's Guide to Writing Better Screenplays Faster. So let's talk about that faster point, because I think it's good for writers to write fast. If you linger and every single word is precious, you get bogged down. Isn't there just a value to writing that quick first draft?
There is, and some of the best scripts I've ever written, I've written fast. And when you talk to more and more people in the industry, you know, people who had, you know, Academy nominations and things like that, they all say the same thing. That's how it often works. You've got passion, you've got motivation, you've got a good, healthy process. The only script that I've ever attached an Academy nominated actor to, I wrote in 3 days. Double Threat was written in 6 days. Night Train was written in 10 days. And the most popular script, my spec script, Blueberry Special, was written, you know, in a couple of weeks. And what I've done is I've really honed the process so that the process is incredibly fluid and focuses on I think a lot of people, they get this mental block because we have the abstract creative side of the brain and we have the pragmatic logistical side of the brain. And if you aren't careful, you can go into a script, you don't know where you're going, you don't have a very good process, so there's all this kind of fear and concern. You know, am I overwriting here? What's going to happen in this scene there? And the problem is that blocks the more fluid, natural, organic side of the brain, which is great with just the flow of real human behavior, of creative ideas, of abstract ideas. So Turn and Burn, as I call it, is a whole writing process. It's my writing process. And I will turn to it if I ever forget any elements of it. I literally use this myself, and it's really, really, really productive for me. It keeps me on track and gets better results, which is, I think, what everybody wants. There's a lot of people that seem to think that good art comes out of pain, suffering, and really hard work, and it's a school-based mentality trying to impress the teacher. It comes from having fun and finding the process so easy it almost feels effortless to do it.
You know, there's a style of writing where you outline extensively and do index cards and all that, and then there's that term I love, the seat of your pants, you know, writer, where you just plunge in with an idea and you don't know where it's going to go and you figure it out. Which style are you?
Very much the first. I go in with a plan. What I do is, my philosophy is the same as how you would come up with a piece of art traditionally. If you were drawing a landscape or a portrait or something like that, it's all about sketching for me. So it's all about sketching and filling in detail. An artist will take a canvas and they will round everything out. They will get the proportions right. They will get the scene right. They will get the composition fundamentally correct. And then they will go in. Maybe they'll add color, or maybe they'll add splashes of whatever. And they will get the bigger picture right first, and then go down into detail. And that's how I write a story. I get the basics of the story right, and then I add detail into that. I always know where I'm going. I'm never going in blind. Now, can you eventually get to the point where you're so practiced at that you can jump in, seat of your pants? Absolutely. I think that you can get there, you know, after a lot of practice, I think. And I think some people, they've spent their life analyzing structure and seeing structure and understanding how stories are built, and it comes naturally to them. Like, some people are just very good at dialogue, or some people are very good at action. There's definitely people out there who can just write well-structured, entertaining stories instinctively, as it seems, because they've learned it passively through their life. So this is for the writer who's like, structure is a little bit of a difficulty for me. and I need to strap on a pair of training wheels and get a kind of template, not a formula, a template to build on.
Well, when you first started out, what books did you read? Were you like a Save the Cat? Did you read Sid
I
Field?
did. I read everything I could get my hands on, absolutely everything. I've got an extensive book list. And yeah, I started with Save the Cat, and Save the Cat really helped me understand the hero's journey, and I took the positives from that, and it did impact me. And yeah, I fell into the trap of looking at my scripts and putting the page numbers next to where these points are going to be, but which is crazy and ridiculous and silly, when you think about it. It's over-analyzing. But I read everything I could get my hands on, and I think it was Writing for Emotional Impact that had the biggest, well, ironically, impact on me, because it really focused on what matters, and that's provoking people's emotions constantly. But I read all that. I've read so many books on art, on business, on the history of Hollywood, biographies, and everything else. I'm an avid reader. I learn very efficiently through that process.
One thing that sticks with me is we're always focused on the hero. I just remember the first time I read this book that said, you gotta make a good villain. You have to have a really good threat in your book. And a lot of times that's the afterthought.
Yeah, I think a good villain is everyone that the audience secretly wants to be if there was no repercussions for your behavior. I mean, villains represent a fantastic amount of hedonism. And if you've got a good strong theme to a story, if you're saying something through a story, you're presenting a thesis, and a good protagonist can present an antithesis. They can present the wrong view when done well, the incorrect view of how you win, or what's true in life. Or perhaps if you've got a tragic story, the protagonist could be proven to be the antagonist could have been proven to be correct all along.
Okay, I'm going to just briefly mention a few things in your table of contents, just so people know there's a lot of content in here. This is just the first 2 pages. And the way you have it laid out is very interesting, because I like books where you can read the whole thing at once and get the main thrust, but if you just want to go back, like, Chapter 8, Happiness and Creativity. I just like the fact that you're not just talking about the mechanical writing, but the state of mind of the writer. And say you're frustrated and you want to pick me up, and it's not that you want to know how to craft the scene, you just want to know how to get into the right emotional mindset. I think it's kind of cool. Value your voice on page 142. Let's go there for a moment. And I think this is a really cool thing, is when we're just in the mechanics of how do I get to the next scene, how do I solve this plot problem, take a step back and don't think of that, but think about, wait a minute, overall, you have a voice as a writer that kind of transcends any one thing in your script. And I think it's always a good way to reset, or if you're stuck or have writer's block, to say, you know what, I've got this voice as a writer, and if I let go of those frustrations for a while, maybe my subconscious writer's voice will solve that problem for me.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to look at yourself as an artist, and I know that can be frowned upon. A lot of people, they say, well, it's show business. It's show business, and they keep reinforcing that. Well, it's also show business. Show. It's both sides of the coin, right? You've got to be artistic, and we've got to be business orientated. Or we've got to accept that the industry is business orientated. It's the capitalist business at the end of it. It's for profit. So I keep trying to remind people about what matters, spiritually in their own heads, and how to get through this marathon. It took me to an incredibly dark place. I'm very open about how dark that got and what it did to me. And as a book, which is quite unusual, it's not a book. It's not a formatting guide. It's not here to labor the point about how you should format a screenplay or something like that. It really goes into my my own head and what I've been through, and also talking about realistic career building mindsets and maintaining a mindfulness and a healthy mindfulness throughout that. So it's particularly orientated to screenwriters who've perhaps been in this a few years and got themselves a little bit lost, confused, and overly anxious.
Well, I like the idea that someone at any level of screenwriting can find their voice, and we're always looking towards the auteurs, or like a Tarantino, his style,
Yeah.
or who's that guy that writes really fast dialogue and does all the TV shows, like The
Aaron
West Wing?
Sorkin.
Yeah, we think
Aaron
he.
Sorkin,
Yeah, we think he has a voice, but they don't. They're not the only people that have a right to develop a voice. We all can, and that's free. That's not something that some outside person has to give you. But I want to know for you personally. You wrote a lot of scripts before you had your first script produced. Now you've had 3 produced. From lots of scripts to 3 produced scripts, how do you think you've refined your voice or discovered your unique voice?
So that happened, I think it was about 5 years in, maybe. I'm going to say 5. I'm going to average it out. I started with a really strong voice. I think what can be quite powerful is to actually go back to your earliest scripts when you were writing without any kind of fear or market awareness. That can be incredibly powerful to look at that. So I was writing quite, it was petrol-head, it was a little bit exploitation, it was a little bit pulp, it was female-led and everything like that. And then I went off the track. Like, I just started to write like sci-fi and fantasy and some really incredibly edgy stuff as well, which was far too edgy, and kind of got lost. And what brought me back was kind of quitting and kind of resigning to the thought that this wasn't going to work for me, which was about 2016 when I started Script Revolution. It wasn't so much the resignation, it was the fact that I sat down and started watching all the films I really loved. I wasn't watching the films I was supposed to be watching. I wasn't watching all the indie hits that year, the Academy, nominees and things like that. I went back and I watched, the, again, in quotation marks, trash that I loved from the 1970s. I spent weeks just going through all these great and stuff I hadn't seen before, and stuff I'd only, I'd heard about and always said I needed to watch, and some old favorites that I'd not seen for 20 years. And I would read about how they got made and look up the trivia and stuff like that. And I read a few, autobiographies, and like, this suddenly had this profound effect on me, where I was like, I like to write pulp. I'm a Tarantino fan. I like cars and shootouts and broken women, right? Why aren't I leaning into that 110%? Why am I leaning away apologetically? Why am I, it's like having a fetish and then like, no, I'm going to bury that down and get difficult and avoid it and constantly live in fear of it, rather than embracing it as much as possible. Which again, if we bring up the fetish thing, Tarantino and putting feet in his, the guy likes feet, right? He puts feet in everything. He just puts it all out there. He goes, I like feet, I put feet there. And I'm like, that, I respect that so much, because it's basically saying, I am not going to apologize for who I am and what I like, because there are other people who are going to appreciate this, or at least appreciate me appreciating it. And that changed everything. Then I started writing these single location kind of pulpy thrillers, and it was just like, wow, here I am. Artistically, here I am. And they were first drafts, and I didn't get feedback. I didn't care what anyone thought. And wow, they brought in so much love and appreciation. And on one of those, a script mine called Blueberry Special, about once a month, I get a producer or director reaching out to me saying, I want to make that script. And I'm like, I think I want to make it now. It's like I like it too much. So yeah, that was the big thing. It was going back to my roots, which sounds incredibly cliche, but it is powerful.
I do like that idea of going back and watching the movies that originally inspired you. And I don't think we have to be locked into that forever, because especially, if we're 12 years old and have a favorite movie,
That doesn't have to be our influence at 42, but sometimes maybe it should be. And that's, I think, we go through this phase of false maturity. Like, I have to appear more adult-like, so I have to let go of that. It's that nice level when you can realize, wait a minute, I'm not constrained by any of that. I can still like, Thunderbirds, or I can still like, Emma Peel and all that. And to think, it's just that now as an adult, I can see an even deeper level to it.
Absolutely. You can go and find the core things. You can go and find, what runs through everything. Like what's common. What's the common factor involved in a lot of these things? Because that's obviously, it's appealing to you in some way. Like, for instance, for some reason, I love the desert, the American deserts. I love Americana, and I was raised on it. So I lean into that now rather than apologize for it, even though I know that there's marketing implications for that. Because I think, if you look at someone like Taylor Sheridan, he's gone in and totally owned the Western scene, totally owned that. And we were told for decades that there's no money in this and it's a foolish place to go. And guess what? He filled the gap. He jumped in. He did Sicario, did Hell or High Water. He's done Yellowstone, and stole Dawn Olivieri of us and did it in the prequel. Thanks for that, Taylor. But yeah, you just jump in and you own that space, rather than try to be like everyone else and just try desperately to be accepted by everyone you meet.
I like when you said you went back to watch these kind of trash films. And see, trash is respectable now since Hollywood has appropriated, every exploitation element. But the one thing they can't duplicate is that original integrity. And again, a lot of it, is not brilliant. A lot of it is just trashy, quickly made stuff. But the stuff that really, makes you sentimental, it is what it is because it was not made with any hipness or with any, self-reference. They just did it because practically they had to make it fast with no budget. And in spite of that, they had a clever script or they had interesting actors, whatever reason. And I think there's always going to be a love for that. And again, it's almost like in the 80s and 90s, there was still that time when Hollywood hadn't appropriated it, and they were still making, exploitation films. They were slightly better. A lot of those Fatal Instinct knockoffs and whatever. But then I think by, 15 years ago, Hollywood really caught on that, we don't have to have these self-imposed limits. We can take the most lurid elements of exploitation film and incorporate them into literally everything. So we can't use shock value anymore. But you know what? It wasn't just about shock value. It really was about these no-budget, unique voices that just had this little warped point of view that Hollywood still can't duplicate.
I think so. All I see in those films is ambition, really respectable ambition. And, it's the old joke, isn't it, that the blockbusters of the late 80s were just the exploitation movies of the late 70s. Jaws is just Creature from the Black Lagoon with some money thrown at it. And I don't mean to disrespect Jaws by doing that, but, it was and Close Encounters and E.T. and, Indiana Jones, those were really refined and well polished and excellently executed versions of these films that people thought were ridiculous, that were being screened in drive-through, movie theaters a decade before. And I think that art house and exploitation always leads the way. I think it always does. I think it's always running ahead. It's always scanning the horizon and pushing things. And it will never be mainstream acceptable at the time. That will always be picked up, that part of the bell curve where it becomes, the mainstream audience's taste. And we saw that with comic books. Comic books, that was a fringe hobby. That was something, that kids grew into adulthood with, and they became edgier and darker with those adults. And then, Warner Brothers in the late sort of mid '80s consolidated everything as they got bought up some other enterprises, and suddenly realizes they needed to start cross pollinating all these different areas of their product range, and are like, we need to sell more comics. Well, let's do a comic book movie. And they chose Batman, and they chose Batman when Batman was an incredibly unpopular comic book character at the time, and just pumped all that money into it. And yeah, I think I think it leads the way. I think it does. I think it deserves more respect.
The thing I like about those trashy old films, and when I say trashy, I mean brilliant, is the acting. That's one thing nowadays. They would not dare make a movie with an amateur actor, put any money into something, unless there's a certain level in all these different departments. And I still just get a thrill by seeing maybe a poorly decorated set, or just, continuity errors and just little things. But I love when you get someone who's not formally trained, yet the camera just loves them, and they're just this meta, just almost like this transcendent experience, because you can't believe this person was actually cast to be in the film.
Yeah. It's kind of, it becomes almost ludicrous, but it becomes ludicrous in a really admirable way. And also some of the ridiculous things people were doing, and you kind of respect it because of the intent. A favorite of mine is Hollywood Boulevard. Roger Corman produced film, and it was Joe Dante who went on to do Gremlins. And it was a bet about whether or not, I think they could make a film in a week, I think, or something like that. And it's a likable, fun film, and it's about a young starlet who shows up in Hollywood, and she gets a casting agent, and he keeps casting her in what's basically criminal enterprise. Her first job is she plays a getaway driver and ends up in a genuine police chase at a bank. But what's great is they keep using footage from other Corman films. There's like car crashes from Big Bad Mama, and they use all the props from Death Race 2000 and a load of footage from that to kind of flesh these things out. At one point there's a random music video for a couple of minutes, and I love it for that. I love it for that because it was so experimental and fun, and the fun comes across. I think if there's any message I ever want to put out to people, is that if you have fun writing and making a movie, there's a good chance the audience is going to have fun watching it. And I think that's why I love these old movies so much, because they were made with such tremendous enthusiasm. There's no cynicism or, corporate behavior behind it.
I think I was watching a documentary about Troma Studios and Lloyd Kaufman, and I think he put a lot of the budget into this one car explosion. I think it was one of those ones where, where the car just barely touches something and then the whole thing blows up. Yeah. And he got so much mileage, year after year, he kept putting that exact clip in movie after movie. And once you knew that, it was kind of fun. You're waiting for the time in each movie, when is that car explosion going to hit?
Yeah, it was quite funny. There's a reference in Archer. I love Archer, the animated series. And there's a episode with Burt Reynolds in, and they're in a car chase, and he swipes a van, and it crashes off the bridge into the water, and then they get in a tussle a couple of minutes later, and another car goes into the water, and it's this exact same shot. And Archer comments, he said, was that the same footage? And it's brilliant because it's that reference to Hal Needham car chases back in the day, where they'd go past the same thing over and over again. And we had this funny thing. We had this car chase that we were knocking together in the latest film, and director Shane, he said to me, I've got to change a shot because they go past the same bush twice. It's the same shot, and it's too close together. And I said, I thought that was deliberate. I thought that was a homage to Hal Needham. And he's like, no, that's just a mistake, and we can't keep it in. And I was like, oh well. But they still go past the same bush about 5 times. It's like the VW bug in Bullet.
Well, when you talk about branching out into directing, here's one thing. You can write a screenplay, and that's one element of a movie. But when you mix it with everything else, casting, costume, locations, stunts, there's a chemistry to it. And especially with film, you can't predict that. You can plan, but you cannot predict how all those elements become a new whole. And I think that's a missing thing when people try to copy other things. They forget the chemistry involved. And I think a lot of times, if you're a director, you've got that force of will that's going to influence all those different departments. And you're making all those split-second decisions of don't do this, no, make them wear that, or someone shows up on set wearing something, oh wow, I didn't think of that, and they become more that character. Or a cool prop, like in Star Wars, the lightsaber, who knew that would become such a big element of that movie? Sometimes we just don't even know what are these elements that are going to be memorable.
That's so true, and it's that preparedness, as I said before, to offer the script as a gift to the production and say, this is my best attempt as a writer sitting in a room alone. Now everybody gets to bring their skill set, their enthusiasm, their abstraction, their creativity to that. And I think what's wonderful is when you have a set where people are granted autonomy and they're able to run with that. And we have to have a lot of autonomy on set. There's only so many hats, we can wear. When you've got directors and they're doing props, for example, and a whole host of other things. So you have a costumer who runs with it. You have actors who bring their own little bits and bobs to that. We had a great one. We've got Joe Lando on the latest film on Night Train, Joe Lando from Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. He's outstanding in this. It's a real standout piece for him. And he plays this kind of a Hal Needham tribute, this character called Chuck, the lead lady's father. And he said, I think the character should have a limp, and I think he should be struggling to walk. And he brought a golf club. He walks on an upturned golf club, and it just works so well. It just brought this whole other element and this suggested backstory and everything else. And I really enjoy it when people are. I think something I do quite often if I'm on set, I'm lucky enough to be on set, is the actors come over and sometimes they want to make a change. And they've gone to the director, they've gone to Shane, and they've said, I want to make a change. And Shane will just say, go speak to the Brit. If he says it's cool, I'm cool, right? And isn't that a fantastic autonomy and so unusual for a screenwriter? And they'll come up to me and they'll say, I've just this, and I'll say, look, if you want to build on this, please build on this. If you want to button this scene up your own way, do it your own way. Bring yourself to this as an artist. And they look at you and they almost well up because it's so unusual for them to be empowered in that way, and they can really throw themselves into that exploration that they want to go on as an artist. So I'm all for everyone bringing what they can to the table. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of wrangling. Sometimes you need to jump in and collaborate and say, look, this is why this scene's like that. We can't lose that beat. And then you'll work together and you'll both go, okay, we now have a solution. And it's so incredibly fulfilling. I talked about megalomania before, but I don't think anyone should be a strict autocrat.
Mm-hmm. We're going to wrap up here. You wear many hats, but I think at your core, you're a creator, a writer becoming a director, and I just want you to, predict the future for creators. You're saying there's so much opportunity, which creates so much competition. We have so many digital outlets now, which makes it easier, yet the floodgates is open, and there's so many people who want to do the exact same thing. It's a numbers game. Most of them will not be produced. A lot of them will spin their wheels, maybe spend a lot of money hoping, that lightning will strike, and it probably won't. So, question number one, and this is serious. At what point is it okay to quit?
I don't think anyone can. I don't think you can quit a calling. That calling can be more broad. I don't think there's anyone who has a specific calling to write screenplays. They might be more of a filmmaker. They might be more of a novel writer. But you cannot ignore the calling. You can either keep on keeping on and find the love for it and find the motivation and maybe quit the niche, such as quit screenwriting and do novel writing, or quit screenwriting and become a filmmaker. Or you can try and quit and just constantly live in a state of anxiety and regret of what you could have written, of what could have happened if you carried on, and just constantly thinking, was that the right decision? So never quit what matters, but definitely if it's making you miserable and you aren't improving and you aren't ever seeing any kind of progress and you're starting to hate it, definitely consider whether or not this is the right medium for your outlet, for your calling.
So after years of writing, you now have 3 of your scripts produced. The third one, to be edited. Did it change your life in the way that you thought it would?
Not in the slightest. Because I think we all fantasize about the security it's going to give us, about the validation that it's going to give us. Life's a lot like that. We're constantly trying to predict our future, and we're constantly thinking, this is going to fix all my problems. This is going to make me universally liked. This is going to make me financially comfortable for the rest of my life, and all my problems are going to go away. And I think what really happens is we kind of find something else, the thing that really matters, within that. And I've definitely found that. I've definitely found an incredible degree of creative fulfillment, an artistic backbone that I desperately needed. And I'm constantly thankful that I haven't jumped ahead of where I need to be, because we're all going to keep making mistakes. And as you grow, you're just so glad you didn't make the mistakes that you made previously on the next stage, because the impact was going to be so much worse. So that is, I've gained something in many ways much more valuable than I imagined.
See, we're all looking for third-party validation. When you've written the script, you and your, I don't know, grandmother like it, but the validation of professionals that you don't even know, strangers in the industry, for them to, give that stamp of approval. I mean, that is a big deal. We can downplay it, but I think this whole thing is, for a lot of people who think that is the holy grail, the reality is it's just the next step to more work, or it's the next step to this other thing. It's not an end thing. And especially when you look at it like you as a career, wanting to create a body of work and create your own, unique artistic voice. How is it now giving you a new fear? What's your new fear of, be careful what you ask for. You're out there. You've got a growing body of work. What's the new fear that has replaced it?
I think the fear is going down a road which defines you as something that you don't want to become known for. I think and you see that happen. It's the danger of success. I'm pretty sure that I want to keep making the movies I'm making now. These kind of Americana, these little bit of throwback to the 70s movies that I grew up with, petrolhead movies, action, female-led. But I think there is an element of fear there, that I'm painting myself into a corner I'll never be able to get back out of. And I think there's a fear that if you are making stuff that's very family friendly, that when are you going to be able to do something edgy? because the industry typically does not allow people to move even laterally. And I know of people who have had incredible success, for instance, with like absolutely massive horror franchises who were originally serious drama writers, and they can't get back out of that hole. They are known for what they are known for, and no one's going to take them seriously outside of that. So I do have a degree of fear that I'm moving away from my pulpy roots, and yeah, there's a degree of anxiety there I have to admit to.
Do you think these first 3 films are too family friendly?
The first one definitely isn't, and that was problematic on the market. So this is kind of how the situation arises. Break Even's full of profanity, strong profanity, and that lost us a TV deal in the end,
Okay.
and impacted us heavily. And I never thought I'd end up doing that, but Double Threat and Night Train has virtually zero profanity within that, and to be quite a sweary writer, a Brit with sweary naturally, to kind of, I wouldn't say neuter, because I still feel there's as strong as I can get within the genre I want to be in, but you do start to wonder, as the pressure of the market takes place, am I going to gradually keep watering down what I do for the sake of selling a film, for the sake of finding an audience? I don't think people realize that all that pain you go through with a script and trying to get people to appreciate it for what it is, you go through that with a film, because again, you're relatively unknown. And I'm just hope that I can grow a kind of cult appreciation, a cult audience out of this, and we can kind of flourish out of that. But I'm ready to admit that there's a risk involved. There's a risk involved in doing it.
Don't you wish you could write a script with lots of Cockney slang?
Well, isn't that a bit of a cliche now? I mean, Guy Ritchie just totally owned that. I definitely gone to do it. I've got one script set in Great Britain, and I really embraced the local accent here, which is, I have a Stoke-on-Trent accent up here, and it was so hard to fight the Cockney slang. He's like, you always want to cast a Londoner in it. It's like, oh, this character's going to have come up from London, so they're proper, we'll fucking kick your head in, we'll have all that. But I want to diversify the British gangster thing a bit. I'm gonna try and bring some fresh voices. Just look at Peaky Blinders, with a bit of Bingham accent in there, have a little bit of that, and I think I always want to bring something new and fresh. But I 100%, I totally admit the temptation there with Cockney.
So, you're still relatively young. How many more movies do you think you can make, for the rest of your life? Do you think you have like 10 more in you can get produced, 20, 30? Are you going to try to go Roger Corman volume?
Reading Roger Corman's book was really insightful and quite inspiring. And I think the mistake that Corman made, he never seemed to really find the right place for himself artistically, and he just kept chasing different, he kept fleeting about in different areas, and he never really seemed to find one place that, as a filmmaker, he had a voice in. Ideally, I want to do this for another 25 years. I want to do this till I'm almost 70, and I ideally like to get up to 2 films a year. So I'm hoping there's at least 25 in there, maybe approaching, a number like 40 or even 50. I'd love to do that. Just keep doing it.
So, well, you've only had one release. Maybe it'll be more when the next 2 come out, but who's the most high-profile person that's taken notice of you? And maybe it's through Script Revolution, but have any of your idols approached you and noticed what you've been doing?
They didn't approach me directly, but we had Steve Guttenberg on the first film, and then there's no denying how huge Steve was in, you know, when I was younger, Police Academy and Short Circuit and Three Men and a Baby. He actually came to us more interested in working with Shane, but I bring him up because it's a name everyone knows and it has high impact. But Steve Gutenberg was the first person who walked up to me and said, "This is a great script," and that was just so huge. It's the first time I got kind of, you know, tingling in my stomach around a star. It's the first time I was scared to go up to someone and be introduced. And yeah, he just looked at me and he said, "Great script, love the pacing." And to chat with him and to hug him after shooting a scene and everything like that, that was quite magical because, you know, I think there's still a huge future for Steve out there. And if I've played any kind of part in bringing him back into the zeitgeist, then, you know, what a privilege.
Mm-hmm. So who would be the dream actress that you could feature or even write a special role for?
It's a tricky one. You know, I like Elizabeth Mary Winstead for an example. You know, I mean, Death Proof, going back to Death Proof. I don't talk about it a lot because, you know, getting into kind of deep stuff and everything like that. But you know, a huge inspiration for me when I was trying to find female actors that really made me want to write characters that I was like, I love their mannerisms and their attitudes and who they are and their artistic integrity. And a lot of people would laugh out loud when they hear this, but, and I mentioned her earlier, would be Kristen Stewart, who's actually now starting to get quite a lot of respect. But, you know, I've had a deep admiration at a borderline muse level for her since, you know, about 2012. It's been a huge inspiration for me. So yeah, that would be particularly special. But then I don't think I'd ever take that up or do it because I think at that point it's too big in your life. It's is that even artistic anymore? I don't know. I just think it's that person's having too much of an impact. There's the dynamics all wrong. So yeah, I think I love working with the unknowns because there's nothing pre-existing. It's all exploration and excitement and surprise, positive surprise almost always.
So when you start directing, will you find your Uma Thurman muse and you know, create a series for her?
We've had a few of those. I mean,
I thought I had that.
We've had a few of those. Well, we've had a few of those already. I mean, incredibly fortunate. You know, Tassia Tellez, absolutely fantastic. She's in Break Even. She was in the 100 playing Echo. Dawn Olivieri, absolutely incredible. She's starting to get some respect now in the Yellowstone prequel. But the big find, the kind of dream find, the one that you kind of, oh, that would never really happen. It's just been unbelievable to the point where I've almost rejected it because I can't believe it's so good and kind of kept myself distanced from was Danielle C. Ryan. I mean, it's just insane. It's unbelievable. You have an actor who she does Hallmark stuff. So she's doing all the family friendly stuff. That's what she's known for. Drop dead gorgeous, absolutely stunning looking individual. Petite in presence, but walks with, you know, determined swagger. And she just kicks ass in all these ways that we talk about stereotyped female protagonists, you know, the sweet little blonde girl who can kick a guy's ass and then jump in a car or get on a motorbike and ride, you know, like the wind, or get on a horse and pull out a bow and arrow and shoot a target at full speed. She does that. She's the real thing. Double threat. She does all her own stunts, every single stunt, all the martial arts and everything she does, and they're top tier martial arts. In Night Train, almost every inch that this huge souped up pickup does in all the chases and all the driving, she drove. There's only one tiny little bit that it wasn't safe for her to do, and we do not risk anybody on set. And you just like, I spent years dreaming about the actress who can shoot the gun, who can do the stunts, who can throw the punch, who can take the punch, get in the car and peel out. And I found that, and it's just like, it just always feels too good to be true.
So you want your modern day Cheryl Ladd.
Yeah.
See, how come people aren't
Yeah.
casting her? Wouldn't she be great as a cameo or like the villain in one of your films?
You do hope to get things like that, but people like that, but it can be so tricky from a market point of view. It can be so tricky. You want to do the cameos, you know, you want Michael Madsen and people like that, and it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell because the people I love and appreciate and want to pay homage to, some other people out there, they see that as, they can see it as tacky. They can see it as kind of tainting things, which I think's awful. I think it's so backward. But at the end of the day, you've got this financier's money. You've got to respect that, and you have to respect the decisions that the brain trust make on these things. So yeah, it's a difficult road to go down. It really can be. It can be really quite upsetting, you know, because you feel for these people. You feel for them because they deserve more respect than that. They don't deserve to be seen as, you know, as a side act.
Well, it's such a rite of passage. You know, you think of Tarantino and when he got David Carradine for Kill Bill, or for, what was the one, Jackie Brown, and he got
Yes.
what's her name, the star of Jackie Brown.
Well, he wanted Mickey Rourke for Death Proof. I don't know if you know the story behind that. He was talking with Mickey Rourke to get him for Death Proof, and the agent screwed that up
Oh no.
because they thought that they needed Mickey, and I've been in that situation. I don't play like that either. You don't let agents get power over you like that. But yeah, I mean, like the Jackie Brown thing and everything else. Like, I mean, John Travolta was such a controversial casting, and I think, you know, Tarantino, because Tarantino is such a geek, that's what he was willing to do. He was willing to cast a slightly fattened, middle-aged John Travolta in a film. He looks a little bit worn out, but can still dance. But the thing is, when Tarantino did that in 1994, you got those people at bargain basement prices. That was the thing back then. Like, that was why it worked so well, because they didn't put a value on themselves. Whereas now that time's kind of passed on. Even people who you would consider quite washed up, they still want six figures. They still want, they've got mortgages to pay, you know, and they think that you want them, you need them, and that can be quite tricky as well. So I feel like a lot of that's passed us by. You just hope and pray that they come to you and say, I want to work with you. And we get that a lot, especially when they see the script. When they see the script, we get people and they're like, I'm going to do this for way under my usual rate because I have to do this. And they enjoy themselves on set, and they wanted to make movies with us for the rest of their lives.
Well, even at the Sharknado level, they want salary and perks.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, Sharknado did incredible foreign sales. Respect to Asylum on that one. Like, who doesn't secretly want a massive hit like that? But yeah, I mean, it becomes unsustainable after a while. Even in that case, like you say, when it's kind of a mocked, you know, it's almost infamous.
Pam Grier, that was Jackie Brown.
Pam Grier.
I love when a director takes an actor they really admire and puts them in. I remember for Pam Grier, not just a cameo, he gave her the lead. I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah, and going back to Joe Dante and kind of linking all this together, I forget the name of the film, but there was a Gladiator film. I think it could have been a Corman film. It's a female-led gladiator film back in the 70s. Joe Dante edited, I believe, uncredited. And Pam Grier's in that.
Oh,
Pam
what's it
Grier
called?
kind of-
Was it Arena?
Arena. That's
Yeah.
it. It's exactly. It's got a great. They used another movie for the scene of it all falling apart. You know, the empire collapsing, and used footage from a different movie in that. And Pam Grier's amazing in that. And again, we go back to who was really putting minorities in films in an empowering way earliest. Well, we go back to what people would consider an exploitation film, but it's not particularly. I mean, well, it's equally exploitative. I mean, the shot that they cut out of that's of a guy's ass, because the orgy scene, so to speak, which never really was a true orgy scene, that made that film quite controversial. It became R-rated, and they eventually released an uncut version. But yeah, I mean, Pam Grier's great in that. It's a strong character, and Hot Coffee. You know, was it just coffee? I forget.
Coffee.
My brain's completely failing.
Coffee.
Just coffee. Yeah, she's incredible in Coffee. Coffee's a great movie.
Yeah.
And again, like, what mainstream Hollywood movies were putting black actors in making them into heroes and making a film around them, especially no less a woman. And I just think, like, this is what frustrates me about the exploitation genre, is it's seen as backward, when actually it's incredibly progressive for its time, and even progressive decades ahead of mainstream Hollywood.
When you just think of representation of different parts of society that weren't seen in mainstream films or on TV, the exploitation genre just opened you up to more of the population in general, and not just the pimps and drug dealers, but it was, you think of the stereotype, but it was also just a bigger cross-section of society.
It was an everyman in a lot of cases, and they showed a better cross-section of society, definitely. And, I think what was quite interesting was when Tarantino did Reservoir Dogs and went to Sundance, and was kind of this unknown director at the time, and he's doing a lot of interviews, and he interviewed very well with people. He did a lot of great talks with people. I remember people saying that he'd effectively just taken the blaxploitation genre and made it more mainstream with Reservoir Dogs. That's all he did. Like, he's seen as a pioneer, and I think he is a pioneer in the big scheme of things. But he was just doing what other people were doing before, within the exploitation genre.
And he had a genuine love for it. He wasn't doing it because it was trendy.
Yes.
And that made all the difference.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, 5 final questions, final heat, because I think in your time it must be like 2 a.m. by now.
It's early doors, yeah. Early doors. I run on Pacific time anyway now.
Oh my God, you probably have a hotline to Hollywood now. Okay, now but 5 questions. So we mentioned the heroine. So who would be your dream character actor to cast in something? Kind of like, who was that guy in Halloween who played the detective? He's dead now, but Donald Pleasance. Where are the Donald Pleasances of the world now?
Well, I think, Gary Oldman's the one to me, is the kind of king of character actors. I mean, just unbelievable. And, I grew up with that guy in so many, even in the short BMW films that were these great little films that BMW did, released on the internet with different top directors at the time. Even Gary Oldman in some of those was just unbelievably good. And yeah, he would be the one. I know he's getting a bit old now, but that would be remarkable.
Gary Oldman. Are you a Gene Hackman fan?
Yeah, I love Gene. I recently rewatched Side and Adventure, and he's just incredible in that. He's just so good. I mean, and obviously French Connection is probably probably his best role ever. And I love the way Gene shouted on Gary. Always shouting, always so angry and animated about everything. And he's so incredible in French Connection because he's just, it was, I think, like the likes of Pacino kind of channeled that later on. Heat and stuff like that, like just a guy just on the absolute edge, of his own sanity to the point of complete self-destruction.
I love the Poseidon Adventure. By the way, this isn't one of the questions,
we almost had a resurgence of disaster film, but I don't think anyone truly makes a modern version of the classic disaster film. We have the Sharknado, but that's really not a disaster film, but they're fun. I think The Rock almost helped revive that with like the Skyscraper movie and that one where everything was flooded, and that came close. But there's a whole tone, and I think the original ones actually kind of took it seriously, and then it became all kind of silly parody. Would you?
They did. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. In fact, I posted on Facebook about this recently and got into some dialogue with people. Rewatching Side and Adventure after watching the remake as well, which is only a mess. The remake.
I hate the
was
remake.
Originally shot to be. But what's interesting about the remake, and I'm not going to try and defend it too much, but the thing about the remake is they shot, I think it was a 2-hour movie, and had to get it down to 90 minutes.
Okay.
And that's why a lot of it doesn't make sense. And he's got some awful choices
The
in there.
CGI. Oh my God.
Some of it's good, some of it's bad. I mean, it is what it is. Because I'm not going to try and defend it too much, but that's why it's particularly odd. But watching that and then going back to the original was fascinating, because the original is, of course, based on a book, and it's an allegory. You know, it has a lot of religious sentiment to it, about whether or not you're going to fight or whether or not you're going to get saved or wait to be saved. And I think there's a lot of powerful messages in there. And I think, you know, Reverend hanging himself in front of everyone and burning his hands to the point where he falls to his suicide in an attempt to sacrifice himself and save his flock, while screaming at his God and saying, how many more do you want? How many more have to die? I think is an incredibly powerful thing to do at the time. And it's really even more interesting when you realize the stuff that happened in the book. The book was a lot darker. But in the book, when they are cut out of the propeller shaft, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen the original Side of Adventure, when they're cut out the propeller shaft in the book, they get onto the hull of the ship, and all of the diners, free of oil and grease and everything else, are being evacuated from the front of the ship. And the ultimate message is, don't fight against God. Don't go off. Don't go the hard way. And of course, in the film, you don't get that element. It kind of says, no, fight for yourself, fight the hard way, don't wait for a higher power to save you. And I think that's really quite interesting that they both kind of have a different spin on things. But I found it incredibly inspiring to watch, and powerful. And again, it's a little bit exploitative. There's lots of women having to take their skirts off to climb up things.
Stella Stevens. Oh, and that had Ernest Borgnine as her brother, or as her husband. Yeah,
right.
He's a great character actor. Oh my God.
He's a very interesting antagonist, isn't he? A very interesting antagonist.
He was great in that.
But she sold her underwear from that. She auctioned the underwear off
for charity, I'm sure.
Yeah, she made a lot of money for charity. I can't remember. I think she said that, or she wished she had. I can't remember, but she's very funny about it. But yeah, and what I love about that film, and it was a change they brought in during shooting, was the larger woman who's constantly being mocked.
Shelley Winters.
Shelley Winters being blamed for holding them back because of her size. She has that incredible moment where she saves the protagonist, and she turns out to be this incredible swimmer. Again, spoiler alert. For anyone who's not watched the film, 50 years old. And I loved that moment so much. I loved the way we had this true underdog, the one who'd been mocked, the one who'd been seen as a problem, just suddenly jumping in literally and like saving the day.
See, when they all jumped on the bandwagon in Hollywood and made disaster films, they made Towering Inferno after that, and they promoted it so much because Poseidon Adventure had been successful. And to me, they're like night and day. Towering Inferno is interesting because of the concept and the special effects, but it's night and day with how they handle the characters. And like you're saying,
Poseidon had this deeper religious meaning, practically. But the thing I loved about Poseidon was it took all these different people and threw them together. And people who normally would not be together had to learn to get along. Whereas in Towering Inferno, it was very fragmented. There's lots of little episodic things. It was that core, because they were all brought together, almost like a, Lord of the Flies, and creating a pecking order was really what made it fascinating.
Yeah, I think they have to be handled carefully, and I think the remake of Poseidon Adventure it has this awful. It starts with this absolutely appalling moment. They're trying to cross through I think it's an elevator shaft, and they've used a table from the kitchens to do that. And gay Dreyfus in this, because it's a modern film now, so we've got to be more inclusive. And I don't love his character. I'm not going to demean that, but he's helping people up, and he's balanced precariously in this elevator shaft. And the hero, if you can call him, that's kind of lifting people in. And the guy that's helped him from the kitchens, who Dreyfus's character is very attracted to, he walks across the platform, and then the ship explodes somewhere, and it shakes, and the platform topples. And long story short, this I think it's a waiter or a kitchen hand ends up hanging from Dreyfus's feet, with the hero hanging onto Dreyfus by the hands, the classic thing. And the hero shouts, "Shake him free, shake him free, he's just going to drag you down," or something like that. And Dreyfus kicks this guy to his death. And this is like an opening scene, as they go off on their adventures. And then later on, they have the audacity to say that they've all worked together and not left anyone behind, or it's just like, who's tracking this script? Who's supervising this? It was so ridiculous. And I think disaster movies, you've got to be careful about selfish behavior, discarding people, leaving people behind, and stuff like that. It's there's more of a black art to it than people really appreciate.
Okay, question 2. In the realm of exploitation film, what subgenre would you like to see resurrected?
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
Because we've seen so much horror resurrected, but even like the action subgenres, because disaster is kind of like an action movie subgenre, right? Yeah. I know I mentioned it before, and maybe it's very low hanging fruit, but I would love to inspire a new wave of car exploitation, just as we move out of the gasoline era, which is what we're doing now. And I don't know how we're going to do entertaining car chases of electric cars, and I'm a big supporter of electric cars. My dad has one and everything else. But isn't, I would love to see we just do a blowout. Isn't the post-apocalyptic story a form of car exploitation, like you were talking about Mad Max? But that always gives an excuse to not have electricity when everything shuts down. Then we had to go back to old technology.
My first script I ever wrote was a kind of Mad Max sequel in disguise. It was called Interstate Juggernaut, and it's just full of that kind of thing. So I'll always have that. And I know we're a long way off, but yeah, I mean, at the moment, if you look at all like the muscle car manufacturers and everything, they're kind of just gone crazy with the Hellcats and the Demons and everything else, and the Raptors. And I'm like, where are the films to kind of showcase this, so we can just, we can exit in a really kind of like fun and kind of, let's just have a big party. And I would be wonderful if Night Train kind of inspired that, and we could just keep doing that for a while. But I think I don't know. I think I can't see it happening, sadly.
What was that George Romero movie with Ed Harris? Was it Knight Rider? Or remember
with Ed Harris?
Remember, it was like where they kind of went back to almost like this medieval biker gang. I can't even remember if it's supposed to be present day or did they recreate medieval jousting, but they did it on motorcycles. Do you remember that?
Oh wow! Now you're going back. Yeah, it was like
and Tom
it looked
Savini
like
was
a
in it.
Wild West on motorbike.
Yeah, and Tom Savini
Yeah, yeah,
played the
yeah.
villain.
I remember that.
I,
I love all that kind of thing.
is that all? Is bike
I
exploitation different than car exploitation,
oh, yes,
or is that
completely
just
different.
outright biker movie?
It's completely different. As someone who hangs around, who's a car guy who hangs around with bikers, bikers are different than sports bikers. It's a whole different thing. Yeah, bikes are all about freedom and hedonism, and kind of wearing that on your sleeve. Cars they should be, and they used to be about hedonism, but cars have become much more about status, and that's really changed the whole zeitgeist on that.
Okay, number 3. What modern filmmakers do you like? Does anyone have a really standout voice as a filmmaker?
Well, I mean, I mentioned Taylor Sheridan earlier, and I'm incredibly envious and jealous of the fact that he's jumped in and just owned the Western scene. And Sicario was just such an incredible film, and again, female lead, and they decided they needed a female lead because you believed the integrity more, from a female, and Hell or High Water is just absolutely brilliant as well. So I love that, but I like some quite kooky and weird stuff too. I'm a big fan of Wes Anderson and what he does, and I know that I can't write like that and shouldn't try to write like that, but it's always a blessing to watch his stuff because I just feel like he's totally embraced the weird thing. Wonderful, and I don't know. I'm trying to think of the guys now. I recently watched the TV series Patriot, which is years old now, and I was absolutely blown away by that TV series. But sadly, the name of the showrunner escapes me. But also Fargo, the TV series Fargo. I love what they're doing with that and how kind of left of left that's getting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a particularly great guy to ask about current events, directors, and films because I am the guy going off and reading the old books and watching the old movies.
Do you think it's more progressive with TV series rather than films now? Because you can explore things more in depth like that?
You'd hope so, but I think limited miniseries, that's where the sweet spot is now. Film, you've not got the time, and indie films limited to this 90-minute window is problematic. TV, you've got this big issue that the network wants the show to go on forever, so it just becomes more and more ridiculous and just keeps ad-libbing its way through, and you can tell that the narrative isn't really established, that they're just reaching. So for me, it's the mini-series area where I think it's the perfect sweet spot. It gives a little bit of time to develop, and also they've got to wrap things up by the end. Luther over here that BBC produced with Idris Elba started off remarkably well in that, and then there was The Honourable Woman with Maggie Gyllenhaal, and I love things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, number 4, your favorite films of all time?
I think Mad Max, The Road Warrior, High Plains Drifter, Every Which Way But Loose, U-Turn, Oliver Stone for that one. I think those are some of the more slightly unusual, but Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, I think it just gets better. That's a film that gets better every time I watch it. Whilst films like Cannibal Run, Smoking the Bandit, they kind of get more campy as they go on, but those films just seem to get better and better for me.
Do you know that in the 70s I saw Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry in the theater? So
that's cool.
That's dating. That's
Very
dating.
Cool. I mean, well, it is. It's fascinating, and I sadly I can't remember there's this really fascinating lore about that film. So the guy who plays the sheriff, who's chasing him around, brilliant. I forgot the actor's name, sadly, which is a bit disrespectful, but I'm terrible with names. So there's the scene where the helicopter chases the Charger around, and it's some incredible helicopter flying. The rotors nearly touch the ground, and that actor said he wanted an enhanced insurance policy for his family if he goes in a helicopter, because he had a premonition he would die in a helicopter. And he did the whole movie, and it's incredible, and he's fantastic. You know, So there was the Twilight Zone death with the helicopter.
Right, Vic Morrow.
Um,
Yeah.
that's the same guy.
Okay.
It's the same guy.
Wow.
And he had a premonition he'd die in a helicopter accident, and that was demonstrated on the set of Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, and then sadly
Wow.
appeared to be a sort of unlucky form of foreshadowing. Yeah, so I mean, that went dark, didn't it? But I mean, respect to that guy. He's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible in the film.
Yeah. There's something so cool about Peter Fonda. He always stood out in his films.
What is it? What is it? What was he doing? What was Peter Fonda? Even when he's interviewed, like 20, 30 years later, he's still dead cool. And yeah, I mean, Easy Rider and everything else. And I mean, in all fairness, and I think Susan George has come up with this before, but I think she almost steals the show from him. But he's just so James Dean level cool, that dude is. And I don't know where it comes from. He's bigger than the picture, isn't he?
Did you ever see The Trip?
No,
Bruce Stern.
I don't
I think
think
Bruce Stern was in it with Peter Fonda, and I think Jack Nicholson does a cameo in it. Late 60s.
No,
We'll put that on your list.
not seen that. Anything Bruce Dern related.
Yeah,
sounds
The
good.
Trip is a must-see. You got to see it. Okay,
That's on my list. That is on my list.
that's on your list. Okay, final question, and I'm not going to make it too profound, but, to get back to Turn and Burn.
Turn and burn.
By the way, who did the cover art for this?
It was interesting. I had a conversation with the publisher, and I said, I want something like a car doing a donut or a bit. And I want something that's high impact, that make people look at this and not take it too seriously. Kind of cool. And he couldn't find a stock image, and he actually put this together himself and threw it towards me. But it was yellow and blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I love it. This is so cool. But I have colours that I like, and those colours are grey, red, black, and white. So I said, throw it over to me. I'll change the colours and I'll send it back. So we kind of made it together.
Mm-hmm. All right, final question. And it's kind of inevitable. No one just wears one hat. Even actors, they veer off and do different things. And, you're a screenwriter. You're probably going to become a director. But your side enterprise, Script Revolution, which will hopefully give your script some resolution. That could be a whole career right there. I mean, so you're biting off a couple of really big things. Now author. And not that there's a danger of spreading yourself too thin. I think you're just establishing your stature in the biz, which is good. But it still seems like screenwriting and movie making is your core. You're not going to give that up to do Script Revolution full time. But I've seen a danger out there. People, they're aspiring filmmakers. They do something on the side. It might make money. It might give them some stature. But then they lose the filmmaking part, which is a shame.
Absolutely.
One thing, I think, on the good side, maybe they find they're actually really good at website design, and maybe, marketing is their skill and talent. And it's okay to let go of the filmmaking side. I think that's okay. And sometimes people become very successful. But it's like when you're straddling both things, I think that's when life becomes difficult.
Oh, man.
And I think I've seen some filmmakers who venture off into more of the promotional side, and their filmmaking gets lost.
Yeah.
And I think if in their mind they go, you know what, I actually like this a lot better. I'll always have a fondness for writing or filmmaking, but I actually found my higher calling. I think it's okay to let go of that thing. Because a lot of people, you just don't know when you're 19 what you're going to do for the rest of your life. But I'm just wondering, for you seem to not be letting go of the filmmaking side, where it'd be very easy. Because, running Script Revolution, I can only imagine is a full-time job too. So I just want, share a little bit of
How do you juggle the two, and how do you not lose sight of yourself as a filmmaker at this point?
I mean, firstly, I don't have much of a life outside of this, and I'm lucky in that regard that I don't have to compromise much else to do what I do. You're absolutely right. Script Revolution is a 24/7 job, and you've got the multiple time zones to consider. So it's not unusual for me to have to jump out of bed at 3 a.m. in the morning and address issues with that. It's constantly there. I see every log line that gets added to the site. I see every member that joins up and fills in a profile, because they have to have 25 words to join, and it's growing into a monster and a beast that I need to put success stories on there. I need to write blogs, and I get more and more people now, little baby birds in a nest, all like, oh, I need attention here, I need attention there, I've got a problem, can you help me with this? And yeah, it's becoming tough. It's becoming tough to manage that, and I'm deliberately keeping the site a certain way and a certain size and doing certain things to, because it's just me, and it's surreal to be listed alongside, all these other platforms that have entire teams running them, and it's just me. And also, like you say, it's not just this; it's the filmmaking as well. And I think one of my biggest fears is becoming one of those people that's selling seminars and consultancy, and people are looking at their credits and they're like, this person made like one film 25 years ago. Like, isn't it obvious what's happened here? And and that film wasn't very well received anyway. I do have a fear of, I don't think any artist really wants to give that in and become a teacher. I think it becomes an uncomfortable choice some people have to make to put bread on the table. So I fight the filmmaking thing hard, and I hold the Script Revolution thing back in terms of what it does for me. I could run competitions on Script Revolution tomorrow. So many people ask, and set myself up for life running those, because the best part of 12,000 people would give me an entry fee, right? And I don't do that because it's just milking vulnerable people for money. I can't do that. So Script Revolution deliberately is kept very lean, so I never become reliant on it. So yeah, I'm just trying to fight the good fight and just keep making movies. I want to walk into a room, I want to walk into a festival as a filmmaker, first and foremost, or as an artist, first and foremost. And if I've helped some people along the way, then that's a blessing. It really is, but that's not the core of what I'm here to do.
What's the legacy you want to leave with Script Revolution?
I want to have... I'm an iconoclast, fundamentally. I believe in you only ever punch up, you don't punch down. I think that we have some establishments that aren't effective, that pull people into effectively gambling, who make a lot of money off the back of hope. And I would like to at least provide an alternative, or show that there can be an alternative to that. Because in 2016, when I set Script Revolution up, there was nowhere you really could realistically go park a script for free. And we're starting to see some movement there. And if Script Revolution does that, and if Script Revolution unites people together into something bigger and more beautiful, then that's fantastic. I'm more than happy to stand aside at any point and let the growth continue.
And what are your plans for promoting the book? Do you have other interviews set up? How does a modern day film book get promoted?
It's like everything else. It's slow and it's steady. This is the first interview I've done about the book. The reviews are starting to come in. It all moves much slower than you imagine. All the reviews are 5 stars, which is fantastic. So the response has been good. At the end of the day, I am who I am. I'm not going to, no one wants to do a press release on CJ Walley and his book. And none of the big opinion leaders want to really talk about what I do either. But Script Revolution's a fantastic platform to point people in a direction where they can get more help and more education if they're willing to invest in that. And the book's all over there, and large chunks of it, or maybe not large chunks now, the book's grown considerably, but some important chunks of the book are available online for free, so people can go in and they can get that. I always believe in that. And the proceeds from the book go back into Script Revolution to keep it running.
So when do you find time to write scripts?
Well, I write so incredibly fast now. I'm able to get that out of my system quite rapidly, and I believe quite strongly in building your energy and resting. And so I'm always writing, like any writer is. I'm always thinking about stuff. I'm always making notes and jotting down ideas and thinking about this. But for the first time ever, I've kind of taken a little bit of a sabbatical on things to get my head around what I really want to do and see what this market wants and see where I can find a gap and nurture a gap within it. So yeah, I mean, we will come to the point this year when we'll come to make another movie, and we'll look at what we've got available and what works, and I'll jump straight back in with a whole new level of energy to do that. You know, I'm not writing specs right now because, quite frankly, there's nowhere for those specs to go. I've got too many that I need to go out and shoot now before I can move on.
Well, I'm looking up so I can start to wrap up with a quote. How about this? I'm going to do, this is from the Happiness and Creativity section.
Cool.
Cut out the toxicity and embrace authenticity, from page 149. Let's see what gems we can find here. Ooh, I like this. This one refers to bootlicking. Okay, here we go. We must be brave enough to stick to our guns and wait for the right person to cross our path rather than lick the boots of those who kick us down while believing that making them happy will ultimately make us happy too. It absolutely won't. So maybe to wrap up and just, give a few tips on creative people who feel like they have to take a lot of abuse from the gatekeepers. What's your advice to them to just stop that abuse and get some self-respect back?
Well, I think we've become programmed now to believe that success comes from flogging ourselves, and if we're shown to be flogging ourselves and we're shown to be putting ourselves through pain and exhaustion, this grind mentality, that it all results in this big payoff at the end. And I think that's a complete backwards way of thinking, and I think it drives people into a very, very dark place. I see people constantly rewriting, constantly trying to make everyone happy, and even to the point where they won't even accept the term good job because they think that's going to be damaging to them. And if there's anything I want people to take, is that this should be an indulgence. This should be fun. This should be, bringing out the kind of childlike exploration that you've kind of forgotten and be an outlet for that. It shouldn't feel like work. This should feel like play. This should be unapologetic. This should be you at your most vibrant and exuberant and self-indulgent. And I think that once you get that and you're willing to go into the world with that, then you're going to find it a much more brighter place, and one that you're going to continue writing within, against the struggle, against the doubters, for so much longer.
I like that. Well, his name is CJ Walley. The company, which you can see on the shirt, Rebel Rouser, like rebel but belle, like French for woman. Yeah. The movies, say the 3 movies so far that have been produced. Break Even.
So Break Even's that's available on some streaming platforms. We've got Double Threat on the way, starring Daniel C. Ryan and Matthew Lawrence, and soon we'll have Night Train for everybody again, starring Daniel C. Ryan. So yeah, I get very excited.
Is that possibly based on the Steve Winwood song? Night Train. You're too young.
I think it was more Guns N' Roses.
Okay. You should look it up online, see if you can get the rights to Night Train by Steve Winwood. It'd be a great night driving kind of music. It'll only be like 90% of your budget but if you can get the song, Night Train.
You know.
Oh my God, his.
You know.
Okay, the website's scriptrevolution.com. The book. So proud. What a scoop, the first interview for Turn and Burn, the Scriptwriter's Guide to Writing Better Screenplays Faster. Well, I thank you. I predict more success, I think. This is just the tip of the iceberg for you. You've got, several decades worth more films, so I'm just really excited to see what's going to be coming up for you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This has been a delightful interview, and it's so good to be able to talk about the kind of movies that I love with someone who genuinely loves them too.